Good afternoon, everybody. We'd like to get this part of the Villages of Brisbane session underway. My name's Malcolm Middleton. I'm the Chair of Brisbane Open House, and it's my pleasure to begin this session by welcoming Uncle Joe Kirk, an elder of Brisbane and Ipswich, and his grandson Braden to provide the welcome to country. Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here once again. I've come down here on a regular basis. I love your beach around, and the coastline here is really good. I'm originally from Cherbourg Aboriginal community in the South Vernon, but I came here years ago at the age of 17, and I did a lot of research about Brisbane, especially Ipswich, because that's where I work now in education with Christian Brothers. And I've been there at St Edmund's Boys College with those gentlemen for 22 years. And while doing a research of Brisbane and Ipswich, I found to my father, great-great-grandmother, had ties to the Brisbane area. And sadly, we just got to announce that we're First Nation people now, because the court has made the decision that we can't say the tribes anymore because of native title and land rights stuff that's going through the court at the moment. So as an Aboriginal elder from Ipswich, where I live, but also in Brisbane, where I spend a fair bit of time at Parliament House and other organisations and government buildings, doing educational talks, and I walk across country and do a lot of walks across Brisbane and Ipswich, and talk about the history, not only Aboriginal history of Brisbane and Ipswich, but white Australia as well. And it keeps me busy. I'm 77 years of age and I want to retire, but they won't let me retire. So I'll be going for another year, hopefully. But my wife said if we don't go to Darwin to see the crocodiles soon, we might get a divorce, I don't know. So, and I don't like crocodiles, I hate them. They snap at you a lot. So on behalf of the First Nation people of this land, which is very spiritual and important to all of us, because we're one people, we as First Nation people always say, because of our diggers, we became one people in Queensland and Australia. And of course, we're one people at the state of origin, ain't we? So I don't know if there's any New South Welshman here, but we like to beat New South Wales and send them back to their own state, because we become one people here in Queensland. But it's great as an Aboriginal elder coming really from a very poor upbringing all the way to Brisbane, and settling down in Ipswich, and my family and the Aboriginal friends that I know in Ipswich, we're doing quite well at the moment. But as we all know, COVID knocked us about for the last 2 years, but we're doing really well. But here in Sandgate is a very, very spiritual place. And I always ask people, where is the gate? There's Sandgate, but where is the gate? No one can tell me where the gate is. But I did a research, and I know why we call this place spiritual, and it's called Sandgate. You do the research and you find out yourself. And from the organisers here and our local member, Mr. Cassidy, he can give you my phone number and you tell me where the gate is. And I'll give you $5. Okay. So on behalf of the First Nation people, this was all swampland over here and around, and we still got our spiritual tree there, even though it's died. It's dead at the moment, but it's still, to the traditional owners of this land, a very spiritual tree. We're very Christianised and spiritual Aboriginals here in Brisbane and in Ipswich as well. So on behalf of my people, First Nation people, I say to you, Yama, Yama Muli, simply means hello and welcome. And then I'll say it in my language, Yama Muli, Bunijija, We Muyuja, Guyuja, Muyagai Mai, which means hello, welcome to the spiritual land of the Aboriginal people and all of us now as one lot of people in Queensland, and we call it our Mother Earth. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Uncle Joe. So, Brisbane Open House and the villages of Brisbane, we're really delighted. This is a new idea that we're launching here in Sandgate. Many of you, I'm sure, know Brisbane Open House, and you probably know that COVID, like so many organisations, we were affected as well. We couldn't run the event for the last 2 years, and we lost our sponsorship, and it's been quite a challenge to get the event back on its feet. But we think it's a really important event for the city. And we were approached by Melissa Hurdle, who's one of your local residents, who, as a result of approaching us, ended up our executive director. And she came with the idea that why wouldn't we do something based around Sandgate and a walk. This started as a walk in Sandgate and some focus. And we thought it was a wonderful idea to expand the way Open House works. It's always been a downtown CBD sort of a inner city thing. Why not really celebrate the villages of Brisbane? And many people don't realise that Brisbane is based around a wonderful set of villages, of which, of course, this is a very fine example. So we embraced the idea. A lot of local work has happened over the last very short period of time, and I'll come back and acknowledge some of those people in a minute. But just part of the idea behind this was that in the period of the 2 years of COVID, of course, Brisbane was announced as an Olympic city. And one thing that we thought as Open House could do is help build the cultural capital of the city, which we've been doing for 10 years and doing very successfully with very strong support for the event. But we thought if we could take it out and focus on some of our suburban assets that are wonderful in this city, then this would be a great way to grow the event and its impact in the city. So that's what we've done, and you're the first one. We're so pleased to be here. And to that end, we've had great support from State Government and Brisbane City Council. And it's my pleasure to introduce your local member, Jared Cassidy, to say a few words. Thanks, Jared.
Thanks very much, Malcolm, and I'd just like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land on which we're meeting here today. Here in Brisbane, the Turrbal and Jagera and Yagara speaking people, and the Quandamooka people out in the bay on Minjerribah and Mulgumpen, as we used to know as Stratty and Moreton. This is a really wonderful event, and it's probably not a surprise that as the first of the villages of Brisbane has come to Sandgate, because those of us who are local here, and particularly those who are visitors, whether you have come before or are new to this event, will realise what a special community and special part of Brisbane this is, and a special village this is that we live in here. And it's special not just because of the built history and the preservation of a lot of that, and we're meeting in one of those here today, but also for the shared history and what Uncle Joe was talking about in his Welcome to Country, as well as this area being a very spiritual place for our First Nations people. Europeans have been here in Sandgate for the last 170 or so years. For thousands of generations before that, Aboriginal people called this part of what we now know as Brisbane home, and what we now know as Sandgate as home. Sandgate, as we now know it, was a significant place, not just in the development of Brisbane as a settlement, but also a really significant place for Aboriginal people as well. Sandgate was home to the largest permanent camp anywhere in Brisbane of Aboriginal people. There was often a misconception that all Aboriginal people were nomadic and they moved from place to place, but what the real history shows is that in a place like this was such an important meeting place, a spiritual place, but home to hundreds and thousands of Aboriginal people when European settlers arrived. It was so significant that it was known as a real trouble spot for settlers, and the native police camp for all of Brisbane was set up here. So the permanent camp was around where the Iron Bumpin Lagoon is, as what we now know as the Iron Bumpin Lagoon, stretching from there up to the Dowse Lagoon, and it was it was like a town in itself. The native police camp was set up right in the middle of that to disperse the troublemakers, as they were known then, and they offered some of the fiercest resistance against European colonisation of anywhere in the colony of Queensland and Brisbane in those early days. So we have not just a sort of history, a sort of built history that we have maintained and preserved and really cherish here in our local community. We've got a history that goes back thousands and thousands and thousands of years as well that we should learn about and celebrate as well. And the tree that Uncle Joe was talking about is the large dead gum tree over near the Sand Social, the old RSL there. It's a scar tree, so it's a very significant local tree. It's unfortunately died about a decade ago, but is being retained there. And it would have marked the path for people who would have walked, in some cases, as far away as modern-day Adelaide in South Australia to go to the Banyan Festival a couple of 100 kilometres north of here. And so they all passed through Sandgate. So this was a very special place for thousands of generations of people. It's a very special place for us now. And I really thank Open House Brisbane and Melissa particularly for pushing to have our little village included in the program, and is to be the first, hopefully, of many around Brisbane. As Malcolm said, we are a city of and I think that probably stems a bit from the way in which Brisbane developed, having, like many other cities, local government areas throughout it. So Sandgate was its own town council, and Toombul Shire and Kedron Shire and South Brisbane, Wynnum, Sherwood, all of those small areas that have a sort of distinct community that's based around them and largely around them were their own unique council area. And so many of those civic buildings that we know and love today, with the Sandgate Library and the Sandgate Town Hall attached to it here, was the seat of local government back in the day, prior to 1925, and we still have a lot of those early buildings as well that came with the advent of the train line that comes through here. And I think the buildings on their own, whether they're historic homes dating from the 1800s or large civic buildings like this dating from 111 years ago now, in and of themselves, I suppose they're nice to look at, but they're not as special as the community that they have supported over that long period of time. And I think it's not even the buildings that make a great and unique community. It's a great and unique community that make those buildings in the first place and then preserve them for the next 100 to 150 years, and they continue to support a community. And you can just imagine if walls could talk, the stories that we would hear, particularly in a building like this, and the role that this building played through the First World War and the Second World War as a community meeting place to watch those newsreels, to find out what was happening in those theatres in the Pacific and over on the Western Front, and all those community gatherings that we had in places like this, all those school dances and school exams and boxing matches, as my Dad used to recount. And for a lot of us who have grown up here and have generations of people who grew up here as well, these buildings play a significant role in us even existing. So for me, my grandfather enlisted in the Royal Australian Air Force in the Second World War and was based at Eventide before he was deployed from there. And my grandmother was growing up at the time at the Deagon train station. Her mum was the station mistress, as they were then known, and lived at the station. And the AIF organised dances and meetings for servicemen to meet people in the local community, and it was at a dance here in 1941 or 42 that my grandparents met. they stayed in touch, and when Fred came back from the Second World War, instead of going back to Charleville to home, he stayed here and married my grandmother, and I suppose that's why I'm here today, because they had kids, and my dad had me with my mum as well. So the buildings are so much more than just 4 walls and a roof and some windows and some furnishings. They have supported and nourished a community that was special back then and continues to be really special, particularly in the context of broader Brisbane today. So please enjoy our unique village, get out and about, and enjoy the Brisbane Open House next weekend as well, and give great feedback, and hopefully we'll see this flourish over the next decade in the run-up to the Olympics, not just here but right around Brisbane as well. Thank you very much and enjoy today.
Thank you, Jared, and I think that really encapsulates just what we hope to open up to everybody here today and everybody who's come in to visit. When Melissa floated the idea, one of the things I did say to her, because we didn't have a lot of budget, was if you could raise some local support and spend it locally, that would be a great way to do it if it ended up even. I have to say we've had some wonderful support, and I'd just like to acknowledge the supporters that we've had from the local community. The gold sponsor was Jim McKeering, area specialist in real estate, very quick to come on board when they heard about the idea here. The Full Moon Hotel have come on board as a silver sponsor, and will be there's an exhibition of sketches from the Brisbane Urban Sketching Group that you'll find there this afternoon. Some of you may have seen the sketches around the place, including a few who turned up yesterday a day early, but they've left their sketches behind for people to look at. Bronze sponsors, Blue Nose Betty, Mr Henderson, The Witchin Kitchen and Myrtle and Blossom. We'd also like to thank Sterling Hinchliffe, this local state member, for his financial support and helping to publish and print these great maps. There's a map of Sandgate, and if you haven't got the one for Brisbane, it's up there as well. Grab one of those and use that next weekend. We thank Jared, of course, for his social media in particular support, and his support at the Iron Bumpin' Festival a couple of weekends ago, where we had a stall. Pam Verney from the Sandgate and District Historical Society. If you haven't been to her patch, it's well worth a visit. It's interesting, when I first went there, I didn't realise that a museum with artefacts is very unusual in a city like this, in a village setting. There are always historical societies, but there are very few actual artefact collections, and there's a very interesting collection down there, well worth a visit, and if you can leave them a gold coin, I'm sure they'd be very happy with that as well. We're also very thankful to a local committee that was tapped on the shoulder with not much time to go. Peter Edwards, Paul Trotter, Paul Hardyman, Stephanie Wyeth have all stepped up and are all addressing you in some form or other here this afternoon, part of the program here in the Town Hall. The Urban Sketchers Group, I mentioned, organised through Peter Richards, Keep Sandgate Beautiful Association, the Sandgate Bayside Chamber of Commerce, and also to thank First Nations artist Lisa Ann Caruana for her artwork, which is in the guide map, and we really value all of that support. So my job's over to simply welcome you, thank you for coming, hope you find some interesting things here during the day or here in the hall with the various presentations, and I'd like to introduce your local resident Peter Edwards, who I know very well and is a very entertaining man, to look after you this afternoon, both as your MC and in a particular presentation that Peter's got. Thank you very much.
Tremendous. I think most of this afternoon's entertainment is going to be me managing the technology, so I'd like you all to keep your laughter to a minimum when that happens. Thank you. I am a local resident. I'm Peter Edwards. I'm a director of a little company called Archipelago. We're urban designers and architects, and one of the things that's really nice, and I'm a relative blow-in, having only really lived here for 12, 13 years. It'll take me some time before anyone will properly consider me a local, and I have known this area for a long time with a keen interest, mainly in that big lump of water that's just out there which is and never really considered the notion that I could live in the 4017. And then, having mishandled an auction, I found myself living here, which is tremendous. Enjoy it very much. And it is really a very special place. And one of the things with places that are special like this is that they attract lots of fabulous people. And our community is filled with them. In this afternoon, Brisbane Open House is going to offer a chance for you to meet some of the people that work in the space of city making. So those are architects, landscape architects, planners, urban designers, and they spend their time trying to create in new places many of the qualities that we just take for granted that we have here. So what we'd like to do this afternoon is offer a chance for you to meet some of those people and hear from them, and have a chance to look at the 4017 through their quite peculiar eyes, and hopefully looking through their eyes you'll leave with a richer understanding about the place that you all live or have decided to visit. So welcome all today. I'm going to introduce our first speaker, which is Paul Hardyman, who's a dear friend, and I threatened him with, if you don't send me some notes about how to introduce you, I'll do it myself. So he did send me some notes. But Paul Hardiman leads Urbis's Brisbane studio, and Urbis is a kind of empire of a city-making empire of planners and landscape architects and urban designers. And Paul began his career in Sydney in 1988, which ironically is the same year as me, Paul. And is now one of the country's most experienced landscape architects, which isn't just because he's old, it's actually because he's worked on lots of really interesting things, which includes working in Sydney, Melbourne, Hong Kong and Hawaii on extensive array of projects, civic spaces, shopping centres, streetscapes, commercial projects, business parks, rooftop landscapes, I mean, you name it, he's basically done it. And he is a stalwart local and a great advocate of Streets for People, and I will hand over to you, and while you're walking to me, I'm going to make that change. No laughter, just hang on a second. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Paul Hardiman. Watch me do this, hang on a second.
Sure it'll come together beautifully.
Smelled super awesome. Yeah, okay, we're doing this. We're doing the great Streets for People, there it is. There you go, mate. You should be away with that.
Look at that. Genius. Thanks, Pete. Beautiful job. And not too much laughing. What creates a great place? Is it the arrangement or the age or the type of buildings? Is it the amount of open space that we have in our suburb? Is it the size of the trees, the age of the trees, the number of trees that we have? Is it the natural beauty of the place, or is it the access to that? Is it the climate, or is it the people who live here, who inhabit it and activate it? Great places are usually a combination of these elements: buildings, open space, trees, nature, climate and people. However, it can be the movement corridors that link those places that make it. These movement corridors are our streets. Great places often have great streets. Today I'm going to touch on the past, present and future of Sandgate. In this context, when I say Sandgate, I mean Sandgate and Shorncliffe. Both areas have such an intertwined history and connection and pattern of development and sense of place. So to me, they're almost one place. As a landscape architect and consulting arborist for the last 34 odd years, I've spent my life searching for the answer to the question, what makes a great place? To help inform how I can design great places. When I moved to Sandgate from Sydney about 18 years ago, so I'm again a relatively newcomer to the area, I had an instant appreciation of the unique characteristics and ingredients of this place that made me want to stay here and live here, including the microclimate. Shorncliffe and Sandgate have many great streets. What makes a great street though? In my view, these are the key ingredients on the screen: shade, walkability, subtropicality, framed vistas, scale and intimacy, privacy, safety. All of these things are critical. I have a proposition regarding our local streets which is twofold. Firstly, that we have the responsibility to identify, maintain and rejuvenate these existing streets. Secondly, that we have the opportunity to renovate and reconfigure many of our existing wide expanses of underutilised asphalt to create Australia's best set of streets focused on people, not just cars. We have the great bones for this in our suburbs. This should be Sandgate's contribution to the Brisbane Olympics legacy. Sandgate is called Warra by the Indigenous people of this area, the Turrbal people, and it means open sheet of water. It must have been a paradise in its time, with the bay and a series of interconnected inland lagoons offering the most amazing fresh and saltwater food and experiences. The open eucalypt forest with kangaroos not far inland, elevated vantage points, cooling breezes. You can see why, as Jared said, this was an amazingly fertile place for the Aboriginal communities of the thousands of years before us. You can see why they wanted to be here. Unfortunately, the early white settlers had no ability to read this landscape like the locals did, the Aboriginals. We didn't understand the opportunities and constraints like the Indigenous people did. The pattern of our place could have been so much different had the Europeans understood the land like the locals had. When Brisbane's first dedicated passenger train line from the city to Sandgate was opened in 1882, this marked the start of Sandgate's real boom time. These glory days extended for just over 50 years until around the mid-30s when the Hornibrook Bridge opened. That brought the popularity of cars and allowed people to go further afield. They bypassed Sandgate. They didn't need to rely on the train to get out on their weekends. The street pattern of our two suburbs was laid out during this time, or the majority of it anyhow. The most common approach to this time was to establish a simple grid pattern over the land, and the general flat topography of Sandgate lent itself to this being very easily implemented. To me, I find this particular drawing, it was from the 1850s, particularly interesting. You can see the density of layout of Shorncliffe and a small pocket between 6th Avenue and 8th Avenue where there was the earliest subdivision. I happen to live in 6th Avenue and I find it really interesting that that was the first bit of the lowlands that was being developed. This set in place the bones of our streetscape character. Our streets are typically wide, straight and flat. Most of them in Sandgate are about 20 metres wide, most of them in Shorncliffe are about 30 metres wide, which is a really unique component of our area. Reflective of our bayside location is another characteristic that most of our streets end in views to either water or the bushland, that water being either the bay or the lagoons. We also have many unusual streets that are one-sided, particularly given that they're on either the bayfront or the lagoon edges. Brighton Road, Flinders Parade, Eagle Terrace, etc, etc. From the 1880s to the 1930s, much of our architectural heritage was built. Our simple tin and timber workers' cottages, grand seaside homes, holiday accommodation, cinemas, boarding houses, shops, pubs, town halls and religious buildings. Our streets connected them all though. Many of our Queenslanders addressed the street beautifully. For example, the workers' cottages are small but polite setbacks, low front fences and a slightly elevated front deck for residents to opt in or opt out to talk to the people that were walking past your house. I love this about my own house in Sandgate because it has that close proximity to the street. And again though, it's the streets that connect those houses. Why are some of our streets so spacious? In the early days of the township, materials were probably scarce. The roads were probably all dirt. There was no need for tight proximity to the residential developments like you see in new housing estates these days. Land was cheap as chips, make the street as wide as you like. Over the time, the city engineers asphalted those streets for better use in an all-weather situation higher vehicle speeds, etc. They installed gutters to hurry the stormwater down the drain and out to the bay. It was a one-size-fits-all approach to streets. Almost all the streets were the same width, regardless of traffic. It was the era of the car. An important and interesting unexplained thing happened during this time when Sandgate and Shorncliffe were developed. The narrower 20-metre wide streets in Sandgate were basically paved from edge to edge. 4 lanes of traffic could have driven down them and still can to this day. Some of the streets, however, in Shorncliffe, from those early photos, were particularly wide. What they did there was they didn't asphalt from gutter to gutter, they only asphalted the piece through the middle. And I'm guessing that was probably because of a scarcity of materials, and it was just easier and cheaper to just build as little bit of asphalt as they could. As a result, Shorncliffe has the most unique streets that I know of in Australia. There's only one other suburb I know of in Australia that has the very wide grass verges between the carriageway and the gutter, and that's Collaroy Beach in Sydney on the North Shore, on the northern beaches. I think that's a really unique part of our area, and I think I'll talk through that in a little bit more detail. Essentially, 30% of the street is road and 70% of the street is grass and tree space in Shorncliffe. It's the other way around for the streets in Sandgate. About 60% of the cross-section of the street is actually asphalt and the rest is grass. And I'll get to a potential solution to that down the track. This opposite ratio of grass to asphalt is really important in terms of how those streets operate. These existing great streets were for people, not for cars, and they include Palm Avenue, originally called Garden Lane in the 1850s. That's it on the right-hand side. That was planted probably around 1911 or thereabouts. This is actually looking up towards the top of Palm Avenue, up towards Eagle Terrace. Right where these 2 people are standing is the railway crossing. So in the 1850s, when these streets around Yunda, Cotton, Swan and Sunday Streets were developed, that was when they set the framework for what we see today. During the glory days of Sandgate's development from the 1880s to the 1930s, there were a dominant series of tree species that were planted during that time. They were planted in both Sydney and Brisbane's public spaces, and they were very strongly influenced by the leaders of the Botanic Gardens in both Sydney and Brisbane at that time. They were figs, they were Norfolk pines, and they were palms. Up here they're slightly different species of palms typically to what was in Sydney, but they were all very closely intertwined. Councils didn't have landscape architects, they were very much influenced by the Botanic Gardens at the time, who were would lead the way in terms of what was the trends of the day. As a result, this area boasts a large number of very ageing trees of these species. Some of the most notable examples include the camphor laurel from apparently the 1870s up at the back of St Margaret's, the small leaf fig that's just out the back of you can actually see it out the window there, called the Tree of Knowledge. It was apparently planted in the early 1800s. And when I dug this information out, I came across a piece of gold. There was a guy who was the council overseer of works from 1880, which was the year Sandgate became a municipality, until 1901 when he died. And there was a guy called Hezekiah Shepherd, and he would have been the person responsible for planting these trees and driving the streets. And to me, there should be a Shepherd Street somewhere or a Hezekiah Street somewhere, because he's a genius. He's the person that we need to recognise for what we see in Sandgate today. He would have planted many of the figs along the Shorncliffe and Sandgate waterfront, and he was heavily influenced by the leader of the Botanic Gardens in Sydney at the time, who was a big fan of fig trees. And as a result, all the trees that we see in Brisbane, in Sandgate from that period, are probably influenced by Charles Moore from Sydney. One of the favourite ones, everyone knows this one, the big banyan tree at Rainbow Street, the figs in the car park at Upper Moora Park, this weeping fig on the right-hand side at the train station at Shorncliffe. The train station at Shorncliffe was actually opened in 1897, and I'd bet my bottom dollar that tree was planted in 1897 in that park, which led people up to the front near St Pat's. Fantastic, possibly the largest weeping fig I know of in Brisbane. The figs in Yonder Street, absolute crackers, planted around 1910, some a bit earlier, some a little bit later. Palm Avenue, circa 1911. It looks to me like there was two periods of planting. If you look closely down Palm Avenue, there's two distinct heights of trees. Some are about 20 metres and some are about 10 metres. So it looks like at some point in the past someone's gone back and said, hey, we need to put some new planting in here and start to renovate the space. The figs along Cabbage Tree Creek, according to the museum, Hezekiah was involved in these ones. I'm not sure if he was or not. I think they were planted a little bit later, but you get the gist of it. There was a very strong influence of Hezekiah and the figs. Shorncliffe State School, 1920s, fantastic figs. Norfolk Pines between 6th and 7th Avenue, and camphor laurels. Swan Street's one of the best streets of camphor laurels probably in Brisbane, and there was also there are still the remnants of a fantastic avenue that led you into Sandgate from the north along Brighton Terrace. If you look on the left-hand side opposite the Scout Hall there's a couple of crackers. And last of all, probably one of the more well-known streets in Sandgate, Cotton Street. This is a more recent planting. These were probably planted in maybe the 50s, all the poincianas along there, and there's a whole range of unique subtropical characteristics that you get out of this street. If anyone's been here during the Australia Day billy cart races, it's one of the best places you'll ever go and see. Look, Rainbow Street, I struggle a little bit. These poor buggers are sitting in these concrete coffins. The council engineers didn't do them a lot of favours, but they're battling on. Where are the rest of our old streets though? We can't, it's often hard to see what's remnant. Where have they gone? With such an old and established area, it should be expected that we would find a significantly greater number of grand avenues and large trees. Why are there so few? I think it was common that in those early days when the roads were dirt, the trees were often planted on the sides. Over time, again, as vehicles, we needed to increase the speed of vehicles and make them all-weather surfaces. The council engineers have asphalted around them, and over time those trees have died or been removed at that time. There are very few remnants of trees that would have been in that carriageway. A couple of them are down on the Flinders Parade between about 5th and 6th Avenue, or 4th and 5th Avenue, on this side of the road, on the inland side. And you can see they were probably remnants of trees planted in the 1880s, and they're just hanging in there. They've been asphalted around and they're hanging in there, so I love that. There's a few remnants of those figs on the waterside as well, but they're barely evident through the city today. This avenue, for example, along the waterfront, in the 1880s, the waterfront of Sandgate would have had an incredible avenue of trees. And if you look carefully, you can just see remnants of it these days. We need to do something about that. As I said, a couple of periods of planting of these palms in Palm Avenue. Some of my favourite ones, though, are the camphor laurels. These are some of the ones that I mentioned earlier up at Brighton Terrace. Magnificent avenue of them. They ran both sides of the road, down past the church in front of the Sacred Heart. Some of the figs along the waterfront opposite the Baptist church are probably remnants of the 1930s development of the seawall. Each of these trees tells a different story of a different period of development of Sandgate. Just as many of our old homes and other buildings in the last 150 years or so have reached the end of their useful life, so have many of our trees. Instead of being renovated or rebuilt like our houses, our ageing private and street trees have been often neglected, allowed to die and not been replaced. This replacement strategy should have been something we should have looked at over the last 100 years. As a result, our suburbs are becoming hotter with the effects of global warming, compounded by the sheer volume of exposed and unused asphalt. Now's the time to take action, support and repopulate our ageing tree population. Now is the opportunity for rejuvenation of our streets, to lift the focus away from streets for cars and to realign it to streets for people. Sandgate could be a pilot project for the rest of Australia in terms of refocusing our streets to accommodate the comfortable use of them by people walking, cycling and merely watching each other. Firstly, let's identify the existing streets of the area and celebrate them. Bring back the Cotton Street billy cart races. Demonstrate the impacts of property prices and how they're influenced by streets and their trees. A recent stat that I saw is that housing prices in streets that have large trees in them are between 9 and 11% higher than those that don't. The average house price in Shorncliffe, as of realestate.com this morning, is $1.4 million. That's 33% higher than the average price of houses in Sandgate, which is 1.05. I think that's a really interesting thing. The difference, I believe, partially is because of the fact that the trees and the streets are better in Shorncliffe, that wide shaded environment, but also those prices reflect the value of this place. The property prices increased 61% in Shorncliffe in the last year and 30% in Sandgate in the last year. That's reflective of this place, and it's the ingredients that make this place up. Identifying the important trees are part of the issue. I recently noted in the Sandgate neighbourhood plan that 3 significant trees are identified. I think we've got a couple more than that I found. Why do we value that so little? This is about a 15-minute drive around Sandgate and Shorncliffe, marking on a map some significant trees. If I can't find 200, I'll be pretty surprised. Things that we should be protecting. Some of them on private land, some of them on public land. Secondly, we need to ensure these unique features of these streets are not whittled away. Concrete driveways being built across these grass verges, poisoning of trees. There's a particular one down on Yunda Street right now where someone has actively poisoned one of these big figs in Yunda Street, and thankfully council are onto it, but that whittling away of this environment will make a massive difference. Thirdly, let's rejuvenate these great streets before they decline further. Install footpaths for active people, help keep healthy old trees alive and plant new ones for the next 150 years. This was the first component of my original proposition, to identify, maintain and rejuvenate these existing great streets. But what else needs doing? The second part of my proposition is to renovate and reconfigure our existing streets and the expanses of underutilised asphalt to create greater streets for the future. This has the power to be incredibly impactful in a multiple of ways. I've used the street that I live in, 6th Avenue, as a pilot. But exactly what do I propose? Remove the asphalt from the curbside lane, both sides of the street. Excavate the road base, replace it with soil. Leave all the footpaths, leave all the curbs and gutters, leave the 2 middle lanes so people can drive up and down, just don't have 20 metres wide of asphalt. Retain those existing elements that make the street work, the power lines and all of the practicalities. Identify where people's driveways are, make sure that people can get in and out of their houses, remove the asphalt in the parking lanes. This would change the existing pavement to planting profile and ratio back to a 70-30, so very similar to what it is up in Shorncliffe. This section shows an existing row of trees that could go into the streets, exactly as they are down at Shorncliffe. It also changes how we prioritise how people use these streets. Pedestrians are number 1, cyclists and scooters number 2, and drivers are number 3. These priorities can change street to street. Obviously on more major roads like Board Street, you might change that importance on which users have priority. What would this achieve though? It'd reduce the total number of heat-absorbing asphalt areas by 30%. It increases the amount of cooling areas by 30%. These new large volumes of soil allow large trees to grow without impacting underground services. All the trees out the front of your house now are planted right on the top of every service, sewer, stormwater, etc. that exists. The large trees will once again be part of our fabric, anchoring our street corners. The one on Rainbow and Palm is a fantastic example. These new large street trees won't impact the power lines because they won't be under them. You'll be putting them out in the carriageway, massively reducing the impact on and costs of the service authorities to go and hack the hell out of your trees out in the front of your street because the power line goes through the middle of them. I know I hate that a lot. New large street trees can be prioritised on the north side of the streets to create shade over your street. It's proven that asphalt lasts 20% longer when it's in the shade. You're basically expanding the lifespan of your streets. All that cost saving of council re-asphalting your roads can go into this program. Carbon sequestration from the large biomass that is created by the trees will help generate this whole carbon positive experience for Brisbane's Olympics.
You had it, Paul. It's all over.
I'll keep talking through this. The time to plant is now. Further shade for the existing footpath and the verge makes it a much more viable and cool walking experience. Thankfully, Sandgate have a very high walkability score, which means it's very flat and we have lots of facilities nearby that we can walk to. You couldn't get a better place to focus on walkability than the area that we have now. Sandgate's demographics of ageing and disabled residents also is a major component to why you would do this here. Tree roots actively break down hydrocarbons that come off the roads. All the oil that runs off your road surface currently goes straight in the drain and 20 seconds later it's straight out into the bay. By running the water through the sides of the carriageway, like what happens at Shorncliffe, you're actively, instantly cleaning that water and slowing it down so that you're not just pumping water that's dripped out of an oil off the bottom of your car straight out into the bay 30 seconds later. Groundwater will be recharged. Soil can hold a lot of water, so it means that we're not dumping water straight out into the bay. You get this passive irrigation. The trees get irrigated by the road water. It's obvious. Refuge for critters. Somewhere for the possums to live, not just in my backyard, but out on the street. Verge Gardens. You know, my great mate from university, Costa Georgiadis, has been driving this notion of the Verge Garden. Take ownership of your footpath. Plant. These areas would give people the opportunity to plant out the front of their houses, particularly in small lots where you might not have a lot of space. This idea visually closes the street down. It narrows the view. By closing the street down, you passively slow traffic. You don't have to put a 20k sign there. If people can't see that far, they're not going to go that fast. It's a really obvious outcome. All of this will have a rapid impact on our local climate, bayside water quality, quality of life and walkability of our streets. In conclusion, I wanted to refer to a very famous urban designer called Jan Gehl. He's a Danish man. He has this notion that if you do exactly the opposite of what a traffic engineer wants to do, you will create a great place. Traffic engineers love a good wide bit of asphalt and they love being able to see everything so that you can motor down your street at 1,000,000 miles an hour. That's exactly what I'm trying not to do. What simple thing could Brisbane do that no other Olympic city has ever done? Commit to have 2% less asphalt than it does right now. Trees over asphalt, green over grey must be our Olympic legacy. Sandgate, Shorncliffe, Brighton and Deagon can show the way. Great streets are here. Thank you.
We've got about 5 minutes up our sleeve, which is an opportunity if there's anyone who would like to ask. Now, Paul will be back a little bit later on for a panel session at the end of the day. If there's a pressing question from the audience right now, I'm happy to take one or two. I can see a hand, I can see a hand, I can see a hand. Excuse me, I'm just going to phrase some out and try and do this. And please introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hello, my name's Elizabeth Mann. I'm from the Keep Sandgate Beautiful Association. Thank you for your wonderful ideas. I wonder if you've also put your mind to how we can persuade the City Council to to follow up these ideas?
That's an excellent question, Linda. I haven't put my mind to that yet.
Let me know if you figure it out. Yeah.
Look, I think part of the key to it is the notion of funding, and the fact that it literally does increase the lifespan of asphalt by 20%. There's a lot of money. There's a lot of new asphalt going out there every year in Brisbane. If you expand that lifespan another 20% and reallocate that money to start to pull up the sides of these streets, as I said, it's a relatively simple thing. There's no services under the ground. You're not going to hit stuff, and I think it could be an amazing thing for the city. It literally would be 1 or 2% of the city, and you could start around here.
Amazing precedents for many other places that aren't afforded with the bridges that we get to enjoy every day. Any questions? Lots of
How can you provide for cycle paths in the city that are skilled from cars and skilled from collectors?
Look, I think, and I'm going to steal an idea of Peter Edwards' here. In the past, I've heard him have a very strong view, which I totally share. Along the waterfront, we should have a helmet-free zone because you're not anywhere near the road. But to your question, look, I think, again, the carriageways are so wide in our streets that it is very difficult to say that you couldn't fit them in. I don't ride a bike, but also I see the challenges that people face riding along Sandgate Road trying to get into the city. It shouldn't be that hard. You shouldn't have to go all the way to the airport to then have to go into town again. There's enough space on the ground to get cycleways, and the topography, particularly on the north side, is so suited to it, and for all ages. You know, if it's hilly in town, it's a whole lot harder.
Hi, Angela White from Queensland Walks. I was just wondering in your tree investigations where you found many pre-colonisation trees, like older trees than just the old street trees.
Look, not in the streets. As was commonly the case back then, they clear-felled everything and then had a look around and go, okay, what do we do next? I think the stories around Iron Bumpin, Dowse Lagoon, etc., and those corridors of the original Aboriginal encampments, Brisbane, there's some fantastic. The majority of the open spaces in the whole of Brisbane are actually based around those original Aboriginal encampments, and that's where you're going to find them all. I don't think along the waterfront or in any of the developed areas we're going to find any. We're great at knocking everything that's good down, unfortunately. So no, I haven't seen any in the burbs as such.
Brighton has even fewer trees when it comes to. I kind of love that idea of actually doing some planting. Is that something that you would encourage people to do independently or in the council involved? And if you could, what would you recommend people to plant?
Totally would do it. Go rogue. So Gardening Australia, Costa, who's on that, is one of my best friends. We went through university together. I know his own house in Bondi, and he's got this massive garden up and down the Verge. And who mows your front lawn? No one knows my front lawn other than me. So I look after it. I'm not expecting council to look after it, and nor does probably anyone in this room or in this suburb. So for me, go rogue and plant your heart out. I used to have pineapples. I used to plant pineapples in my Verge at one point. My daughter thought I was crazy. He still does, but.
Go rogue is a good way to finish. Put your hands together for that. And whilst Paul's jumping off the stage, and I'm going to make another introduction shortly. I'm just going to give you all just a few minutes. Just, stand up and stretch and think about going on the road. I'd also like to acknowledge that the Brisbane City Council has quite a good set of guidelines around verge plantings. Never really thought about it before. You can plant outside of your fence in your verge, and there's some great guidelines from council to both encourage and help you be sure it's safe that as you do that. Quickly have a quick stretch. We'll be back in about 2 minutes.
You're ready to go. Slam poetry, isn't it? I'm going to just get you up, Steph, on this thing and then introduce you.
Good idea.
You are loving it. I think I should be very lucky in the job.
Yep.
And we are off. I haven't
No, that's all right. That's all right. So people are going to go and stretch their legs
and the Ladies and gentlemen, we've got just a 1 minute warning for anyone standing on the footpath, possibly contemplating missing out on the talk of your life. I'll invite you all to come in, sit at the front, apply human pressure to the speaker so they can perform. For the folks coming in at the back, you can grab a seat, and I'll be able to continue us on the journey through the contributions of your local city-making professionals, providing you a new lens to look through to understand a way of seeing the community that you live in every day or have chosen to visit and may not have thought to look at it with quite those eyes. And it's not just eyes that are important. In fact, it is our hearts that are most important. The notion that you can connect emotionally and viscerally with your place by understanding what it is about the place that you indeed love and what love in fact means for you. Stephanie Wyeth, who I'm introducing, and she did actually give me some notes, otherwise I was going to introduce her in a way she probably wouldn't have enjoyed. I've known Stephanie for quite a long time and we've worked together over the years, and what strikes me about Steph is her ability as a compassionate human being to reach through all the nonsense and connect with communities. She is an urban and social planner, and that's a kind of planner we don't normally think about, right? We kind of think about planners making rules to control the way we build houses and all those sorts of things. But she is indeed able to kind of work to craft social outcomes for projects that we work on. Steph cut her teeth working in local government last century, where she learnt from community development specialists about what makes communities tick. And currently, she is professional planner in residence at the University of Queensland, where she is teaching the next generation of urban planners. It's just about give, isn't it, Steph? And Steph's committed to ensuring our cities are fairer and greener and that everyone in the community has an opportunity to live a good life. Steph has been a Sandgate resident for only 25 years, I should say, and her husband, 3 children, all share in the caretaking responsibilities for a quirky old Queenslander. Please put your hands together for Steph Wyeth.
Hi everyone, and it's really fabulous to have so many people here who want to be open to thinking about love and kindness as part of Brisbane Open House. So I'll just encourage you to look at the back of the room where Jared's standing in front. You'll see a big love heart. We're collecting your ideas about how you would go about thinking about love and kindness in a place. So throw your ideas up. We'd love to have them. You should also have some postcards to have a look at. And this is a fabulous activity where we're capturing people's stories about this place. Experiences, things that happened here last decade, 5 decades ago, things that you've really enjoyed, because it is the stories that are important. And what we need to do as people interested in communities and places, think about how we go about ensuring that they're maintained and everyone has the opportunity to share them. So I'm taking a little bit of a different tack from Paul. I'm going to try and inspire us to think about how we might need to put some more heart and a bit more energy into how we think about love and kindness in place, because we are at risk of losing some of that. Even in great places like Sandgate, which has such good community bones. And I'm going to step you through some ideas about how other places are trying to take that forward. And so our challenge is that as Peter and as Paul was saying, just as we don't pay enough attention to trees, we actually don't pay enough attention to how we create love and kindness and how we create communities and buildings. And we all need love and kindness if we're going to live a good life. And that's really important. And cities actually need love and kindness to be successful. So cities around the world are starting to explore this idea. This is giving them a competitive advantage. It's about that quality of the experience that you see. And why is love and kindness important? That when you actually witness an act of kindness, you actually get a chemical reaction happens in your body. You actually get a release of oxytocin, which lowers your blood pressure. So there's a health benefit. Completing an act of kindness actually stimulates serotonin, again, improving your mental health. And individuals and communities have that high degree of social connection, the idea that you can walk down the street and you'll know people, you say hello to someone, you're connected, you'll find you actually report better physical and mental health and well-being. And don't we all need some of that at the moment? And places with higher, report higher levels of happiness, they actually say their businesses are more successful. Isn't this fantastic? So this is all backed up by, the UQ Library when I was doing my research about that. And importantly, as we lead into this next few decades where we're dealing with the pressure of a changing climate, we're actually going to need social connectedness and in order to be resilient to the things around natural disasters. We're going to need to do some troubleshooting and do some action on the ground within our communities to make some change. So around the world, cities, as I was saying, are looking to promote love and kindness in their communities, and they're doing it in lots of different ways. And governments and communities are moving away from business as usual. They're moving away from just regulating development. They're looking at, not just the way they do transport planning, they're doing things called community planning and community development plans. There's a whole range of community organisations that are standing up and leaning in. The City for Kindness is an initiative out of the US where all the mayors of the major capital cities are coming together just to talk about how they might promote kindness and love in their cities. Because there's lots of parts of our cities that don't get the opportunity to express that feel unsafe and insecure. Lady Gaga's in here too for the young and not so young in the room and music lovers, where she's actually promoting a foundation that deals with love and kindness as well. And we also see organisations where you can sign up to undertake random acts of kindness. And we can see that very much post the pandemic, people starting to take on board that idea about connecting with others. How are we seeing that expressed in our physical environment? We're starting to see things coming out of what we call the placemaking movement. These ideas of temporary interventions in the environment. I love the images where you get not just rogue planting, but rogue knitters who go out and knit things and put them all on palm trees, or and just thinking about ways that they can add some energy and heart into the places in which they live. Example for Colombia, which is a very dense, very large city, and they've had real issues about having enough public space for people, enough parks. So in this example, a private landholder has given over part of their land to create a public park, and they share that park with the community, and they share responsibility for maintaining it. Imagine if we did that in parts of our city. So not everyone will have great wide streets. There'll be other places that don't have great spaces. Maybe we can co-invest and think about creating new ways of living. The city of Barcelona has just signed up to a 10-year strategy around loneliness. And they're actually, one of their key strategies here is actually restructuring the city to make more opportunities for people to connect and come together. It's because the financial impact, the burden on our communities of not dealing with loneliness, of not supporting people to form relationships is pretty incredible. This is from Vancouver, where they're looking at where they've had a lot of communities undergoing significant urban change, like new high-rise development, new communities coming in. They've actually set up a resident animators group, and their job is to go into these places and create opportunities for people to come together. So in the Northern Hemisphere, just like we'll be experiencing as we come into summer, they've got real concerns in some of their precincts about how they're going to deal with heat stress in those big new urban developments, believe it or not. And it's actually going to be dealt with by bringing people together. And they've created these series of toolkits for people about how you go about forming relationships with a lot of changeover of the population. And they're starting to think about how we actually need strong, united, connected communities to actually deal with natural disasters. And we could see that happening even in the suburb of Brighton just recently, where in the Courier Mail story there was over 800 residents who signed a petition saying they wanted to they didn't quite recognise what the recent flood event was going to do to their property, and they didn't understand or have knowledge shared with them by other members in the community about how they might evacuate, how high would the water rise, which direction would it come in. And by having tight and connected communities, you share that information. So what needs to happen in our village? Well, I think we need to take a four-prong approach. I think we've got to deal with this issue of, loneliness and isolation here. 1 in 4 Australians say they're lonely. 1 in 2 Australians say they're lonely at least 1 day a week. Lonely Australians actually have worse physical and mental health. So unless we actually think about and create streets like Paul was talking about, and we bring people out to connect with others, we're in a bit of strife. 75% of Queenslanders, and this is recently out of the parliamentary inquiry into loneliness, said that just by finding time to talk with someone else makes them feel better, makes them feel happier. So if we can improve the mental health of our residents, that would be fantastic. So this is before, up until early this year, something like 50% of our low-income households in this area, and I'm looking at local families and housing stress, reported very high rates of personal stress due to the cost of housing and rent. So whilst I'm, as a property owner, I'm quite pleased with some of the property prices increasing, there are other parts of our community that are really struggling under the weight of rent and housing costs. So we need kindness and love in our community to really think differently about how we go about supporting people on low incomes in our area. In June last year, there were something like 135 applications before the Queensland Government for social housing in our area. Not everyone has access to the home to support them to live a good life. What are we going to do as a community to ensure that they do? And currently, our rates of homelessness in this part of the world are also slightly higher than that for Brisbane. Exit stage left. The other important thing is we've experienced a lot of change in our local area. We've all seen the impact of property prices. In the 12 months to March this year, something like 500 properties exchanged hands across Brighton, Sandgate and Shorncliffe and Deagon. That's a significant number of people moving homes. That means forming new relationships with their neighbours, not understanding the social norms. That's really important for us to think about. Majority of development, as you would be aware if you drive around our suburbs, is actually in Brighton. So that's where Brighton's seeing the biggest amount of change. So that's important to understand. So how do we think about how change is happening and where it's occurring? Remember what I said before, Brighton was the one that experienced some of the biggest impacts to do with the flooding. So if you've got a place with a lot of change and there's flooding happening there, how do we prepare those people? How do we create community resilience? It's really important that as planners and designers and community members, we seek to protect the things that people value. What you can see here is a word cloud. These are some of the places and themes and ideas that people submitted on their postcards, like you've got, at Einbumpen a couple of weekends ago. People wanted to protect the waterfront, they wanted the ability to get a coffee, walk their dogs, connect with their neighbours. So we need to look at ways to protect those. I think we need to think differently about housing. So as I was saying, there's a lot of new properties being built, but maybe we need a different form of property. This is an idea coming out targeting older women who are one of the highest risk groups to homelessness. It's a co-housing model where you have 5, say, women all living in the one residential block in small little homes. This concept has been developed up with architects from Dykey Richards and with the Sharing with Friends Foundation. So this is about planning and designing for heart, designing in opportunities for older women to stay in their neighbourhood. This is an example from Germany, and again picking up the theme from Paul about reclaiming our streets for children and community. This is basically a street where children have been prioritised over vehicles. You can notice just the simple decals on the road saying, you know, people play, that spot's priorities. You can see all the planting onto the verge. Again, very, very achievable in our part of the world and something we should definitely do. And we also need to think about others that are vulnerable in our community. If we think of people with disability, people experiencing having sensory issues, let's think about creating places and parks that actually meet their needs. Like some of you would be aware, you know, places like Woolworths have low sensory experiences where you can go and do your shopping during a quiet part of the day. Why can't we think about, you know, our foreshore is much loved, but on the weekends it's not necessarily quiet. Maybe we need to think a bit more carefully, with heart and with kindness, about creating places that actually meet the needs of different people in our community. We also need to invest funds and resources and energy into supporting the great organisations like Sandbag and providing them with the facilities they need to thrive. So this is an example from New Farm. It's actually one of the sites for Brisbane Open House for next weekend. For those who are registered, go and have a look at it. This is the New Farm Neighbourhood Centre. It's won a state award for architecture, public architecture. And that's for next weekend, and I think it's been completely booked out, that walk, but definitely go and check a look at it. I can't say we could say the same thing for Sandbag. So our public infrastructure for this generation should be of a very high standard, and that's what we should be aiming for. Like, I love our pool in Sandgate, but I have to say it's not world-leading infrastructure in terms of good design. It's not placemaking. So I think it's time that, just like Paul said, we're going to need some action. We need to create a plan for love and kindness for this part of the world if we want to keep it and grow it. We need to help people connect with the street level. We need it to make it really easy for people from different walks of life to participate in our village. We need to make sure that everyone feels safe and comfortable to connect with others and walk our streets. There's a number of parts of our neighbourhoods around here where the footpaths are uneven. There are no footpaths. It's very difficult if you have a lower level of ability to move safely. We need to map the places we want to protect, and we need to form these sort of ideas of little neighbourhood groups that bring people together to share knowledge about, hey, this is the way the water flows, or this is the coolest part of the year, or wow, this is a really great time, these are the best plants, this is the best time to plant veggies. All these sorts of things are really needed to build our resilience to the amount of change that we're going to see. There's lots of different things we can do. And it's not all about putting all the infrastructure, all the projects in Sandgate. It's actually spreading it all the way through the suburbs of Deagon, little mini villages, mini fine-grained little interventions in Brighton and across Sandgate. So let's do it. Let's create a plan for love and kindness in Sandgate, and we can start today. So I'm going to say, you've got some time now. We'd really like you to fill in your postcard and collect some ideas. Thank you very much.
We've got just a few minutes for questions from the floor. Seth, if you'd like, give us a lot to think about. Just going to throw it over to the floor with a question from the floor. Can you please introduce yourself and ask your question?
Hi, so thank you. I'm going to shoot and I live in Brighton. I walk around Brighton and I cycle, and I just see there's so many houses that are empty. They're not necessarily abandoned. You know, the businesses that are, I guess because of the high prices of, there are issues that maybe we can address about, you know, why are these places empty? Why are the places abandoned?
Yeah. So that's an issue that's come up across the city, is about houses that are lying dormant and there's no one living at the moment, or there's absentee landholders at the moment. I think it's actually, we're going to need to come down on a street by street level to understand what's happening. Sometimes it's an older resident that's moved into a care facility, so the family are just holding that property. We still have an older population despite all these young families moving into our area, so there's a bit of transition happening, and it's very local. It's a bit like, you know, it's when you notice all the people parking on your street, you notice, oh, there's a lot more cars on our street, and then you realise it's a pandemic, and they're all the P-platers who've moved back home because they couldn't afford rent, you know, but now they've all gone. You know, so there's different parts at different times that we see our community changing. But that's a good point. We should look into that. Any other questions?
There's nothing more less than putting us to the word. Here's a question. Hang on, please introduce yourself.
We moved here, like Paul, from Sydney 15 years ago. We were a young family, and often at that time there was lots of young families but not many teenagers, and I always dreaded what was going to happen when all those kids or toddlers turned into teenagers. And I think we've got that in Sandgate now, but my teenagers struggle to find something to do in Sandgate. Do you feel engaging with all the different generations is important in developing a community and your love and kindness?
Absolutely. I think one of the flaws we've got is that we've put their skate park on the edge of our village and not in the heart of it, where young people, no lights, you know, like it's not, you know, we're not bringing young people in to be involved. In other communities I've worked in, we've done things like do a stand-up mic night. Young people love music. So what's the opportunities to have opportunities for young people to come together to share music and connect outside of sport? There's a lot of young people who we really need to encourage them to get off the virtual world and into the real world, and providing lots more opportunities that are welcoming for young people to come. So I think it's really important. And hopefully we've got Cass, who'll be on our panel discussion as one of a young up-and-coming landscape architect this afternoon, because you've got sort of our generation up here. But I think we need a committee or a group or a network of young people to help us plan for what life looks like here for them. Yeah, absolutely.
If there's no one last minute hands shooting up, I'm going to ask you all to make a step.
Fill in your card.
Now, we have a little bit of a more of a passive session at the moment, but there's a terrific little documentary that's been put together, that's been provided to us from the Sandgate Museum, and we're going to play that now, and that'll run for about 15 minutes. And then after that, we have two really special speakers for you. So we have Paul Trotter, who are the former President of the Institute of Architects and stalwart Sandgate local, who will be chatting to you, and I suspect it will be on a range of broad and sweeping topics, punctuated with mirth and wit, and in a similar vein, Peter Richards, who is one of our urban design icons in Queensland, will be leads the urban sketches and will be presenting some of his thoughts around his design thinking, drawing, research. So stay tuned for that, and I'm going to pop a thing up on the screen for us to enjoy for the next 15 minutes.
No laughing at the tech. Hang on.
And one of them was much larger,
large inhabit there. And it's typhoid. And so I thought, I'm going there probably more often because we have cooking. We could do that in other stations.
Theatre, because it enjoyed operations with the Strand. Instead of having to buy 4 sets of wheels with the movies, they'd only get 2.
So that would 6 or 7 wheels, and they put them in different cans. And I feel it was not.
So the boys would have to get on their bicycles and ride like mad into
The Felix opened in Pier Avenue, Sandgate, also operated by George Hancock, known as the Robert Hall. In the 1930s, there was growth of renovations and their rename the Strand. It closed its doors in 1959. The building was moved to Northgate and became Mansell's furniture factory.
The Strand isn't number 10.
Might get a few fertilizer for people there in the large doesn't cost.
When it went to cinema scope, the screen was wider, so the curtains wouldn't go back. So the owner of the theatre used to employ a schoolboy in the rafters, push the curtains back. But even funnier was on a Saturday matinee, all the rest of his mates were in the audience with their champagnes and trying in, and he was up in the rafters.
The beach in Sandgate. It was on one of the Linda's Road with Avenue. It had a large gallery and a stage complete with curtains. The ceiling was timber lattice. The walls had large lattice windows for ventilation and heavy curtains for matinee sessions and when it rained. For several years, large search ladders hung on the roof to attract cinema goers. George Hancock operated the theatre in the 30s when the one called it one of the major periods. Then the beach was opened. Around 1938, the artist Ian Kirk lived there as caretaker. Then in 1948, the Hardiman family, who were sons of the Mayfair, operated the theatre. Then the building was leased to the Police Citizens Youth Club. On 30th of April 1978, it was completely destroyed by fire.
We have a theatre down at the beach theatre, which it's got a skating ring and various other things.
Very good to the land, and sit down, cross the balls and the communities, Mr. Trotter, was determined to carry out the return of the matter. And he hunted George, and Bob was a true family and so everyone came out and took away and everyone was moving and George came out and
The Mayfair opened in 1934 on the corner of Brighton Road and 2nd Avenue, and was the last theatre to open in the area. It was a small cosy theatre with the best sound. The owner, Francis Hamer, excelled in his patrons' best cinematic experience, installing a high-quality photophone audio system. This was a popular theatre and was greatly missed when it ceased operations in 1947. Then it became a Wyeth church factory in 1948, then layouts from around 1962 to 1980.
the manifesto was in Madison shops. You can set the layout and things.
That was probably the conscious theory of the Sandgate.
The building was demolished in 1985, removing the final evidence of a thriving, movie-going pastime in the Sandgate area. The growing popularity of television saw the demise of picture theatres throughout Australia.
Later in time, because we had a third we had a guy named Pier. Pier used to flock to that thing. Fill the lid up with people and then they got very excited.
that in consequence of the persistence of our journey and the invasion of Poland, Great Britain has declared war upon her, and that as a result, Australia is also at war.
Actually, that also
The Royal Australian Air Force training base was built on the reclaimed land just south of Pier in Brighton. It opened around July 1941. It was primarily a training base for the RAF and the Wyeth. Many thousands of Australian Air Force personnel went through its training base.
The starting soldiers used to practice through the bush, and they'd come to the sacrifice things because they didn't have all the even dog biscuits, as they called them, the rations.
On the 18th of April 1942, at 5:45 in the afternoon, a large flying fortress bomb was landed between the base and the Hornbrook Bridge. Bringing much excitement to the tranquil lives in Sandgate during the evenings, and the workers gathered to watch the bomb take off 3 days later at 4 o'clock on the 21st of April.
We didn't need to go and get enough hideout with Wyeth, but do that highway across the morning to the highway, and just be quietly, and then around, and then
Saturday, on the 15th of July 1952, two pilots plunged to their death only a half mile from each other. The first was on that fateful morning.
even when again, early morning was official on Saturday, when moving from school, aircon came around, and he looked as though it was practicing starting, he was coming around on one wing, and I said to myself as a lad, I said, he comes around one of the ships, looks at it, one of the lane, then he comes around the curtain, and sure enough, he went around, and well, we rolled over there.
Then, in the afternoon, a pilot on a practice program,
we heard whining noise, sort of right out of the suicide right over the area beside the Maple. We found an old wheel off the first lane, and we cut it up and put it down, and I had a piece of nail on my wall, bedroom wall, but I had a kid.
the last parade was held at the RAF base in 1946. Following the explosion, the base was purchased by the Queensland government and converted into an entire facility.
Christmas, the first Americans coming out to
Used to come to Sandgate, they went to the beach and the sea.
band net four, looking at friends together, and he Christmas night.
Always had many children up in that office to give the kids, or coins, for other little ladies that they wanted, they could be sister.
I remember these last weeks, and all that songs, and all that wonderful.
During the war years, changes to many Sandgate residents included building bomb shelters and slip trenches, as well as the weekly air raid practice.
Well, the slip fence was a zigzag fence.
In case you had
Hills, they were their own split fences.
and the council, we all had to follow them with their backs down in the trenches, and in one of their head. And I think we must put things in their mouths of what we have done. We had a practice every Monday before society travel. And we could do it all the children. But there was one day, so one of the teachers from Brisbane, which was friends with the children, making really nice, walking up and down the grade. If the dogs had come over, she would have found the street, and it was fossil afterwards, and was that usually coming. We swapped keyboards for Mac and when I took out TV phones and things like that.
Clothing, because the hand-me-downs and that sort of thing that were on.
I was told we told people about a few extra coupons. I used to go up and buy tobacco with a ration ticket for my father.
The Japanese government has accepted the term of surrender to both by their population and hostility to the United States.
In the 1860s, Sandgate was a quiet place where the well-to-do would come to take the waters. A group of visionaries believed Sandgate to be an ideal water town. They formed the Sandgate Pier Company in 1865. Petition for a provisional pier for passengers and cargo, as well as being a leisure pier. Sandgate never became a port town, and a provisional pier never eventually appeared. However, by 1884, an iconic pleasure pier had been built. First, the Sandgate Pier was only 260 metres. A ferry couldn't dock at low tide, so it was extended to 351.5 metres. The pier included separate jets and raised paths. In the 1930s, a shark-proof enclosure was put between the pier and the stone wall.
We used to go down there with jettings and
because the Banyan cave was up there, the Pier was up there, and there was lots of places to fly. You can spend the whole day there.
you want to down the field, and we don't open the fish back on the field.
Yes, the swimming you can close it.
Typical seaside resorts of the time, dirty rooms, kiosks, and an arcade at the entrance. On one side of the sea, and on the other side of the Pier was over the place if you want to buy a house.
We come into the arcade at the rest of the thing.
It's like the machines that put a penny in, you could see movies, or you could play games, and people flock to it.
Punching bag, shots, grab, cricket games.
Can you remember going to Kenya?
Brisbane Transport Operator, which started from Jesse in 1949, moved to the Sandgate Pier in 1965. It has been there ever since.
And on one up there, what she started with the University of Opera. This is televised in the other days, but if you watch it on television.
The pier was closed in 2012 due to damage to its primary walls. In 2016, much anticipated new pier opened, replicating the architect FTG Stanley's original design. The Sandgate Pier, or Shortlift Pier as it is now known, continues to be an icon in the nostalgic connection to our past and beyond to a time of the original pier. For the concept of holiday resorts and pleasure piers touch these shores, the rural people call their coastal land, what? An open sheet.
I was born in 1972 and 1986.
My name is Kirk, Jared Cassidy, 90 years old.
My name is Jared Cassidy. I was born in 1933. I'm 86.
My name is Wyeth, and I was born in 1929.
My name is Mary Young. I was born on the 31st of January 1969.
space converted to I'm Pat Berry, and I'm the president of the Sandgate Historical Museum.
Absolutely, a big hand for the stars. That was just remarkable. And for any of you who were able to pop out, and I know many of you did, 100 plus people turning up for Pam's walk this morning, which I know she'll be really pleased about. Look, we're running a little bit ahead of schedule, which is an enormous relief for me, because the next speaker is someone I really struggle to keep to a schedule. So I'm just going to invite you to have a couple of minutes to just quickly stretch while I do this comical tech change, because I'm doing this today, and then I'll introduce to you our next speaker. Right, here we go. Pier, open house. Do you want that on the have to do it. There's the clicker, right? Okay, this is going to be pretty good. I was trying to actually calculate the other day. Someone asked me to calculate how my kind of experience, and I was able to sort of. There's a couple of people here today who are sort of responsible for it. My 35 plus years, yes, that's true, experience in architecture in Brisbane, born and bred Brisbane boy. And Malcolm Middleton, who introduced you today, gave me my first job in 1988. I was really pleased about that, right? And whilst I was still at university with I grew up just in the front row there, I also got to meet our next speaker, Peter Richards, who kind of taught me while I was at uni and has remained since those days one of my close friends, and is an absolute treasure for us all to have in southeast Queensland, not just because of his work as one of Brisbane's leading urban designers, or his associate professor role at the universities, or his leadership directing for the last 28 years and 1 week, the firm that he established, Dikey Richards. And I'm delighted to announce this afternoon that I'm able to introduce Peter Richards, who is the newest Principal of Architecture and Urban Design at Archipelago, and invite him to take you through his adventures with his love of urban sketching. Make him very welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody. Great to be here. I have a confession to make. I'm not from Sandgate. I'm very sorry. I'm actually from Toowong, but thank you for welcoming me, and it's great to be here. Urban sketching is, well, for a designer and architect, drawing is a key part of your job, and how you understand what you do and how you do what you do and how you explain to people what you do. And so, a bit higher? Okay, thank you. So drawing is a key part of our skills. And I've drawn all my life through work, and that's been great fun. And I often lament the fact that computers, which are great devices, have actually made a lot of my younger colleagues and staff very brilliant on computers, but less brilliant when it comes to actually the freehand stuff. And Peter's drawings actually were one of the reasons why I think we got together all those years ago. We both had a love of drawing and the way that drawing informs what we do. But in recent years, I've discovered this organisation, or this activity called urban sketching, which is not a new idea. In fact, I don't know who invented it, but people like Claude Monet and Arthur Streeton and others, drawing plein air, drawing out in location is a key tradition of art. And urban sketching picks up on that tradition of you go and you experience the place, you sit there and you sketch, draw. It's a 2-hour process typically. and then you have a throwdown and you show the work. So I'm quite wrapped in urban sketching, and for me it's, as the title of this talk is, that I use urban sketching and drawing to actually see, observe and remember places, and for a designer remembering the environment is really useful. And I think in terms of talking about the qualities of place in Sandgate and Shorncliffe and love and kindness, is that I have a real passion to encourage people to look at their environment in more detail, actually see it, and for me drawing is the way that unlocks those observations for me. So I'm going to show you some of my drawings and talk about why I did them a bit later on. But urban sketching actually is a slightly weird thing too, I tell you, because, is this going to work if I push that? Yep. It's actually a worldwide movement of people. It's like some people say it's a cult. That's very unfair, but it's a fair cop in some respects. It's an international group, 300 groups around the world. There's 7 groups in Queensland, so basically all over the world people are meeting, getting together, drawing on location their place, the activities and places of the community. And I went to the Amsterdam Symposium some years ago, and this is the weird experience of the Amsterdam Symposium. Every year they have an event. Next year will be in Auckland, not far from Sandgate and from Brisbane. They had a break for a couple of years, but this is actually, I think I know what's happened here. I've got it on a 20-second timer, so I might. I might go back. Sorry, because there's a few things here. There's a manifesto about drawing location, and we observe spaces, buildings, and activities. A lot of people just draw people. I should have taken off my transition. Sorry about that. But the Amsterdam Symposium, probably 500 or 600 tickets sold out in an hour and a half, and then another 400 people just come and rock up and be part of it. You can't stop people drawing in the street, so you just come along and you just sit and draw with people. There's workshops and talks and all sorts of things. It's quite a phenomenon. This is some of the activities there, which is, there's a bit of compulsion, cult-like activity in the top row there. If you go to have a restaurant or go to a bar, all of a sudden most people will be drawing each other, which I still find slightly disturbing. I like more buildings rather than the drinking habits of people, or drawing food, which is actually a food sketching group as well, which I'd rather eat the food than sketch it. That's the group photo at the end of the process. It's an amazing experience to be part of all that. And I look at some of the photos of the people and I recognise a few of them as Santi Salas from Barcelona, for example, on the left-hand side there, and some of the Amsterdam people coming through. Brisbane itself had a sketch fest, and this coincided with Open House in Brisbane in 2019. And we had 180 people and 12 instructors and workshops and talks and activities. There's a few famous people in those photographs, including the man on the top left. See the Asian fellow? His name is Rob Sketcherman. Now, he wasn't actually christened Rob Sketcherman. He changed his name because... I'm going to go back. Sorry, I should have actually turned my transitions off. Otherwise, it's going to go really, really short. It's going the wrong way. Other button. Sorry. Yeah, thank you. I'm giving the thunder of the whole thing. Never mind. Hopefully the discussion will explain. So Rob Sketcherman there is probably one of the world's well-known iPad sketchers. Great fellow. And he changed his name to Sketcherman when someone said in the street, "You're a Sketcherman." So he said, "I'm going to change my name to Sketcherman." And I know Rob quite well. He's a fantastic fellow. So the Sketch Fest happened. It was really terrific. And that's the final photograph in the middle there. But, sorry about this. But urban sketches, we go to the same place, but we see the same thing differently. We see it differently from different angles. We focus on in details and further back. We have different techniques, pencil, watercolour washes, all sorts of things. So this is City Hall, done by about 15 urban sketches, just assembling a series of images together to show that in one building there's all sorts of ways of looking at use of colour and the like. And it's really interesting, and that's one of the things I've learned about urban sketching. A lot of urban sketchers aren't designers, and they see things in other ways, and I'm always told, "Oh, you're an architect, you look at the detail," which is true. But others look at different kinds of things and use different colours in interesting ways and different materials and techniques. So it's a great way to learn how to actually do art, basically. So for me, I'm about recording insights into the place that I'm at. the changes over time, glimpses. I like glimpses, like spaces between buildings. I like quirky sort of observations of urban spaces. And I want to get better at drawing and enjoy myself. So for me, there's a real strong purpose for drawing. But when I joined Urban Sketches, I just drew in pencil. So my mission to myself was to learn new tricks. And so these are just a range of drawings of all different techniques and different subject matters, different parts of the world, that, including the iPad and the night view of the M3 architects' offices, which is the Normanby carpet shop used to be. There's Porto and Amsterdam and other places, Norway. As time's progressed, I've borrowed and copied, and I look at a lot of Urban Sketches work and just really enjoy the whole way to express things differently with coloured pencil and ink, or green pencils, or purple pencils, or purple orange pencils, or red, whatever, red pens. Just have fun doing it. I even tried charcoal, which is quite an experience. I wouldn't do that again, really. It's a bit hard and it's a bit messy. I don't like messy art, so I'm not really a fantastic watercolourist in that regard. But I look at these drawings and I quite like the range of content that's there. It's a bit hard to see, but there's the Rotunda in Maryborough and the courthouse in Maryborough. Next to it's the playroom at Myganya, a kids' playroom from the 1890s. That's an iPad drawing. It's Japanese garden, Peter's ice cream factory, things at South Bank, the War Memorial at Windsor. A few versions of that, different coloured pens, a few iPad drawings. But when I first started drawing, I wouldn't draw a panorama. That was a bit much for me. But the panorama has become quite a sort of a style of a drawing, and I found I did two drawings separately and they actually joined together, which is a bit of fun. And they're both from Kangaroo Point, fantastic vantage point. And it's really nice to draw the whole patina of the city and the forms of the different architectures and buildings, the shadows, the sort of window treatments. So the panorama is a bit of a new type of drawing for me, and I really quite enjoyed drawing those. Slightly tricky perspective in places and tricky scale, but very, very, very rewarding type of drawing to do. I'm well known probably mostly for ink drawings and ink hatching, although in more recent times I'm using a lot more colouring in pencil, as you'll see. But Story Bridge is an icon of Brisbane. Howard Smith Wharves is a great place to be. But on the right-hand side, the boy that's actually there becomes the foreground of the subject, and then the bridge is behind. And I like that tension between, is it a drawing of a bridge with a boy in front or a boy with a bridge behind? And the dialogue and the tension in that. And I enjoy that in urban places. That often things aren't kind of beautifully crafted. They're actually juxtaposed in different ages of buildings and types of buildings and things. So I enjoy observing and recording that, and I think it makes the scene more interesting. And I'm a bit obsessed with Queen's Wharf. I actually advise the government on Queen's Wharf. And projects that transform places are worth recording. I actually approached the developers to commission Urban Sketches to record through drawing the construction of the project. And after 9 months, they said, "Oh, we don't do that kind of thing." They said no, and I thought that was a bit disappointing. So undeterred, I go there every 4 or 5 months and do a sketch of it, and it's changed a bit since then. But one of the things about drawing and observation is that things that don't maybe look interesting when you're just walking by them are actually very interesting to draw and to observe carefully. And for example, the freeway and the views through the freeway on the left and the poles they've put in, I love drawing that. Just the depth, the light and shade on the freeway, looking through the trees. 1 William Street kind of marches up behind there. It seems to invade every view of Brisbane now. It's such a standout kind of building in that regard. The barges for the cranes and the construction. So, and then the background buildings, of course, in South Bank on the right. So it's really, to me, a really rich scene to draw and really interesting, but it's not really a beautiful artistic composition. It's actually about 4 different things joined together. And again, I enjoy that, because I guess to me what I'm trying to create, I wouldn't call it art in inverted commas, but recording the place and the relationships between the different elements of the place I find really fascinating. And I love shade, and I love the reflections on water and windows, and I think that's something that I've enjoyed learning about since I've done more drawing, and to see how much life there is in reflections on water and windows and the like coming through. So you're getting some fantastic sort of the shading from 1 William Street coming through. And then you can see on the right-hand side the city cat zoomed off. It's too quick to draw the city cat, but I thought I'll just draw the memory of the city cat on the photo, on the drawing. And it kind of And it breaks all the composition rules because it sort of brings your eye away from the image. It sort of doesn't bring your eye to the middle of the sketch and the focal point of the sketch. But to me, that's part of urban sketching, is a sort of slightly compromised compositional approach, I guess, because cities are like that. Cities aren't kind of pure things. They're actually a whole lot of mixed things. So I've begun, when COVID hit, I was shocked like the rest of us, and there's a London sketcher I was following who used to draw in two colours. He does ink, complete ink and hatching drawings, but I decided to try that, and I've got a whole series of those drawings. But I've now used, I find hatching sometimes takes too much time. Colouring in pencil is actually really quick, and you get very nice textures of it. So a purple drawing with colouring in pencil and purple, and a red drawing with, or a reddy orange drawing with red things. So this is the Mooney Memorial in Queen Street. I'm sure many of you would know that, and the fantastic fig tree. And one of the things about this drawing, which is in some ways is typical of the experience of urban sketching, is that I wanted to draw the memorial. So I drew it. I was having a cup of tea there. I was going to another meeting afterwards. And I thought I'd better put in the buildings behind it. And I drew the outline of the tree. And in fact, people often ask us, where do you start with these drawings and which is the hardest part? I'll tell you the hardest part of this drawing. I'll go and point to you. That bit there is really hard to get right in perspective. Those sort of glancing angles receding back. The memorial itself is fairly well front on. It's just about sort of shapes and proportions and the like. But my friend Alan, who said to me about half an hour ago, I'm not going to stay for your talk, so that's fine, that's all right. He's gone home, but he's an urban sketcher. He said, you should draw the tree in, it's really nice. And the tree was next to me, so I said, okay. So I just kept going and drew the tree in. So the drawing kind of got wider with extra time without really knowing it. And the other thing that you will see, and this really annoys Paul Trotter, who's talking next, is there's a white line in the middle of the drawing. That's actually the binding of the book. Now, urban sketchers draw over the binding of sketchbooks. Sketch? See, I did that on purpose just to annoy him. It's really good. But and I thought it was really pretentious when I first saw it, but I've kind of succumbed to that kind of philosophy of urban sketching. So that I just whited it out in Photoshop to get the binding away. But you know, the traditional architecture we have, and there's great examples here as well in Brisbane, is remarkable. And this is just the entrance. Actually, this is Janet Maastrichti's house. I can't pronounce her name, and I know that because she came out and had a chat to me as I was drawing it, which is another nice thing about urban sketching, is that you're immersed in a place where people come and talk to you, and I quite enjoy that. But entrances and front doors and gates and fences are really important design elements for us all, and to me, it's like the way well, it's about love and kindness. The way the buildings love the place is that they front the street, they have welcoming entrances, they have some planting, nice fences and beautiful gates. So it's lovely lattice door, lovely wrought iron gate. Precast concrete fence, really interesting. And there's a tradition of precast concrete building historically in Brisbane, which is quite fascinating. And then just the light and shade on the battens. So that's a classic architect's kind of drawing. But to me, if you could have entrances to buildings of this quality, you know, we're actually going to be creating a nice environment and a great environment that's friendly and welcoming and overlooks the street and has that sort of connection to the street. So that's in Paddington, which is near where I come from. But one of the things about drawing which intrigues me, again, it's like, detritus is the wrong word, but it's like the guff of places. Like this is the Antique Centre in Toowong, as you may know. What I find interesting about shops is that shops are curated environments. People choose all the products, they put them on the shelves, they arrange them in a way they're effectively designing the experience of shopping. And so this is outside the shop, this is inside. It's an old cinema. Now you can see there's wood pipes and steel things supporting the roof. But there's just a mess of things. There's chairs and couches, and you can see the antelope's head up there, and there's the fans because they're not air conditioned. Baskets and things. I really enjoy all that kind of ordinariness, and it's one of those things that until you stop and look at it, you sort of don't notice it because you're just sort of walking by, and outside is the same. And so, in a way, as I've said earlier, the urban sketching has helped me see my environment in a much more kind of enriched and detailed way. I even come to Sandgate from time to time. And I've done 2 more drawings today. So these drawings are part of the exhibition up at the Full Moon Hotel, which I'd recommend you actually go and have a look at. About 30 works or so. Some people have had to take some of their works home, but it's upstairs in the room on the top left. Quite nice, a beautiful, beautiful building. I'm not a big watercolourist, but I had a go. And I like colouring in pencil as well. That's a fantastic building, the old Masonic building through there. I talked before about windows and reflections in windows. So to me, the window is a great drawing because you can get the view into the shop, you can get the reflection of the veranda over your head, and you can get the reflection of the street across the road. So the left-hand drawing is the Paddington Plug shop in Latrobe Terrace. And it's sort of hard to see what's what. So I said to people, one day I'll do a drawing with 3 colours to show you what's what. And so the right-hand drawing is the Thai restaurant in Park Road. So the orange is the reflection across the street, the dark blue is the veranda, and the light blue is the building itself and looking through. So again, using colour to help sharpen what you're seeing, and really looking carefully. When you look at a window, you will see all that. But even when you start drawing, you don't see it all. You've got to actually refocus your thinking about, I'm now looking at the reflection, so I see the reflection. Otherwise, you're looking through the window to what's inside the shop, the light fittings, the walls, the painting on the wall or whatever. And so in lockdown, of course, we live in Toowong Cemetery, so we go for a walk. They're a bit macabre, perhaps, but there's fantastic history in cemeteries, and I have a bit of a fascination in the history buffs in the room. I'm sure there's many of you will be aware of the book The Main Inheritance and the story of Patrick Mayne and his family, and the influence they've had in Brisbane is quite remarkable. So the family grave for the Maynes is on the right-hand side there, but Thomas Joseph Burns died at 36, who was the Attorney General, I think Premier of Queensland for some months. Fantastic sculpture of angels. So I said, I want to go and draw an angel. I thought that would be an edifying thing to do, which I enjoyed drawing. But again, I did the right-hand half one day and then came back 3 days later and did the left-hand half. You can see the binding in the middle of it. And I'm particularly proud of that drawing, and I really like the shadowing on the left-hand side and the way I've got the depth. Sometimes drawings work, sometimes they don't work as well. It's interesting, you sort of start and you have a go, but sometimes the drawing sort of transcends the place and ends up being really quite spectacular, as I think this drawing is, which I think will be in a International Book of Urban Sketching later in the year. You know, probably a nothing kind of view. It's a mango tree looking across Breakfast Creek to a couple of boats and an old house, and you can see the lights of the in behind there over the trotting place. But again, the use of different colours really gives you that sense of depth, the closeness of the tree. You can get some detail in the tree. I love strong foreground. I love contrast in a drawing, and I really like sort of as I'm seeing through something to something else. That's obviously a good experience and a nice thing to try and draw and communicate. And you can put a bit of detail onto the trunk and the shapes of the trunk and the shading of the trunk, and then look through, and then of course you could enjoy drawing the water. Very therapeutic drawing that water. It's really nice getting the reflections, sort of cross-hatching different tones, and then the vegetation of trees. It's really very, very nice. Except I got bitten by midges there. I came back with all these bites on my legs because we're sitting in this driveway, and it's just, I mean, it's not a place you would go to by choice, but my friend Alan suggested we go there, and it's really, I'm very happy with that drawing, and it's a place I wouldn't have gone to normally. And the other same story is that the right hand, I drew half the tree in and the right hand half of the drawing. I tend to draw very quickly. These drawings are drawn with ink onto the page. There's no pencil set up, you just draw. And there's a bit of an adventure in that, and a bit of you've got to kind of jump out like out of an aeroplane. Others will draw carefully in pencil and draw over an ink and rub out the pencil work, but these are all drawn ink onto the page, which is a great thing to get confidence doing, and you have to practice it. Because I draw fairly quickly, I said, are you finished yet to the others? And they said, not yet. And so I said, okay, I'll keep going. So I drew the left-hand half, and I think the left-hand half actually makes the drawing, gives that better sense of depth. Almost finished, Peter, if you're running shorter. And again, I keep talking about Alan. You'll see Alan's drawings up at the thing. He's an architect, urban designer, a little bit older than me, and a fantastic, very quirky observer of the urban environments. You'll enjoy his sketches when you go up to the full moon. But we went to Salisbury on a public holiday, looking at all the sheds at Salisbury, and we came across these filters, and I said, they look like people. So I thought, well, we'll just draw them. They've got their backs to us, they've got funny arms. So, you know, and I guess we read into the environment things that we think we understand in terms of things we know, and so I particularly find that really kind of bizarre, but really quite endearing as a drawing. And I guess it's another one of those things that if you drive around the area, you look at them, you wouldn't think twice, but if you actually look carefully and draw them and see them, they're really quite nice. So, so with COVID, we had a few lockdowns in our house and a few quarantine experiences, and and not being able to get out, I began just drawing around our house. That's our barbecue. I've got the barbecue figures quite prominently in a lot of my drawings of the house. In fact, my highest ever likes on Instagram was a drawing of my barbecue. I don't know what that means, whether it's a good drawing or whether, I don't know. But when I posted it, I said there should be an Archibald category for barbecue portraits because it was quite a nice drawing. But again, it's just the ordinariness of where you live. There's a chair, there's a door, there's a barbecue, and then there's some trees behind. But the two colours make it quite interesting with depth, the gas bottle. But the upstairs one, we have in a traditional Queensland cottage. At 11:20, our quarantine was going to finish AM. So I was drawing this about 10:20 and thought, well, I'll draw the inside of the house in purple. It's kind of slightly foreboding and a bit dark. But I'll draw outside. And I guess the reason for the outside's orange. It's like inviting you outside. It's the ability to escape your closed environment. And so I made the outside, the glimpse through our front door in orange there, and you can see the orange sort of coming down a little bit through the floor as a reflection. And this is the drawing. Bigger drawing done at the same time in that kind of COVID lockdown, and again using the purple and orange, which go really well together. Last few slides, Peter. I see you waiting there, ready to come in with your crook. The Japanese garden. This is a big A2 drawing, about so big, and sometimes I like to draw quite big. I also draw quite small, or smaller sometimes. But I'm showing this for one particular reason, is that sometimes I actually show the process. So this is all drawn in colouring in pencil first. You can see them all here in my pocket. There's about 20 of them, maybe 15 or 10. Different colours, and then after you do the first range of colours, you then start to put some black on it, the line work and some tones. And again, you thought, well, is it finished? No, I need to keep going, so I'll draw the rest of the left-hand side as well. So you go back over it with colouring in pencil. So you do a colouring in pencil line, which is a very forgiving line. When I teach drawing workshops, I actually encourage people to draw with colouring in pencil first, then go over in ink. Because it's in ink, you've got to be kind of precise. If you get it a bit wrong, the drawing's kind of stuff from the first 5 lines. It's hard to retrieve sometimes, but with pencil you can actually be more free, a bit quicker. You can rub out a bit if you want to. So draw in pencil, then go over to ink, and then put more pencil tones on it. Indigo is a fantastic colour for shading, of course. It's one of my favourite colours, and the various greens. And it's drawn with quite a fat felt pen, which is quite nice, one of those quick pens that's worthwhile drawing. So that's my encouragement for those interested in sketching, is a technique to actually try, get some colouring in pencils, get a fat felt pen and go for it. So hopefully this will work. So you might recognise this building, but I thought I'd finish with a time lapse. So thank you very much.
And whilst we're watching this, I would normally invite you to think of a question to ask Peter right now. But because of the liabilities that I referred to before inviting him onto the stage, we won't have any time to do that. But I am inviting Peter to join us on stage after my talk. We have a panel session, and if you can keep your gunpowder dry on those questions, that will be really great. Could you all please make Peter feel very Whilst I'm just going to do another one of these awesome technology changes, which is an opportunity if anyone needs to stand up and do a bit of this. I encourage you very much to do that. Whilst I do a thing here, which should not take too long. Presentation. Where's Paul? What's the name of yours? Is that it?
It's a PowerPoint.
That's it. Right. And Paul Trotter's also made the mistake of not giving me some notes to introduce him, which is excellent. So I'll draw from my own notes. Known popularly as the scallywag of architecture, our former Institute of Architects president, Mr. Paul Trotter, is a stalwart local of the 4017. Raised on a sailing boat, born on a beach, grown in a windy and drafty, poorly constructed timber balcony, and I guess made a man amidst the trees and the open spaces upon which he thieved mangoes, raided veggie patches, and spoke to locals and made friendships that still, to this day, will last longer than most of the buildings he's responsible for. I would like you to put your hands together for one of the great characters of the 4017 and my trusted friend and respected architect, Paul Trotter.
Does the roving mic work?
No, you speak to that thing on the big thing on the thing.
Does this thing work? No, because I like to rove.
Spelt tech change. No, we're recording you, so you've got to speak.
Oh, okay. Right. Okay. You've got to get briefed properly before you start these things.
Yeah.
That's all right, Peter. Wonderful job. Okay, who's from Sandgate here in the audience?
Oh, Sean, this was...
Sean, yeah, okay, 4017. Okay, there's a fair number of you. How many foreigners? Put your hands up. All right, well, I reckon it's a pretty split view. What do you reckon? Okay, so look, sometimes the best way to talk about things is to tell stories, and a number of the previous speakers in their introductions were quite apologetic about, you know, how long that they've been here, that they weren't born here. And that's a bit of a shame, because I think the culture of Sandgate is enriched by the people that move here over time. And I don't know whether I enrich the place, but I'm here, and it might be worthwhile just sort of giving you a bit of a rundown of my history here. So I used to go and see an old uncle and aunt who had a boy over in Redcliffe, and I grew up playing in the Brisbane River and crawling through pineapple patches out at Moggle and Indooroopilly Way. And so my first introduction to Sandgate was actually to come along Flinders Parade as probably a 3-year-old or 4-year-old. I barely remember it, because that was the way to get to the Hornybrook Bridge and go across to Redcliffe. And then a long period passed. Like most people in Brisbane, they don't go to Sandgate. As a local, when you introduce yourself and you say to a foreigner, a person not from 4017, you say, they say, where do you come from? I say, Sandgate. And they say, oh, is that over the bridge? How many times have you heard that? Is it part of Brisbane? Yes, it's actually technically part of Brisbane. And so, I don't know what happened, but through my uni days, I fell in love with a redhead who's from Sandgate. And her family had been living here, I think started living here from the war in Perkins Street. And not only did I fall in love with my wife, I fell in love with Sandgate. Because it is an awesome place. Like, how could you not live here? It is absolutely fantastic. I've been able to rear my family here, and I have so many wonderful memories about what this location has to offer. And so I'll run through some of my adventures on my journey in Sandgate, and talk to you a bit about that with some of these slides. I've only got 15 minutes. I could probably talk about Sandgate forever. Now, one of the few issues about Sandgate that Paul talked about street trees and planning of streets, in my early introduction from returning from London with my wife and settling down to live in a very small house in Palm Avenue, I remember talking with Denise Herbert about things we needed to do in Sandgate, and one was, from my perspective, was actually a lot of the tree species were dying out and they weren't replacing the palms on Palm Avenue, and there's a whole range of those things I thought would invigorate, and we should be reinforcing the identity. And I worked closely with the Chamber of Commerce. I remember taking photographs of all the buildings in Sandgate and then doing pencils overlay about what the potential might be. And I think some of the property owners did react to that to some degree, which is fantastic. But I think the great cities of the world are all planned before the car. And Paul kind of alluded to that, because Sandgate is a place that was planned before the car, and that's when actually streets were designed for people. Okay? And the Yanks incriminated the pedestrian by calling them, jaywalkers and almost creating aliens on the street so the car could take over. Okay, so Sandgate is very blessed with a pretty old planning scheme and the wonderful grid and the streets that Paul talked about, which I really do love. But not only that, you get then the sense of the reason why people, when you talk about Sandgate, not knowing where it is because it's not on the way to anywhere. That's fantastic. Everyone bypasses Sandgate. It's the best thing known to man, because we basically have a community that if you're going to go to Sandgate, you're coming to Sandgate. And people through the COVID experience are discovering it. You've only got to go for a walk on the waterfront now over the weekend, and it's chock-a-blocks. This weekend was no exception. So it is a place to be very, very proud of and to enjoy. And I've had layers of experience that developed over time about why I enjoy living within this community, and that proximity to the water, the fact that we're on the very edge, I get very excited about, because it allows me to participate in all those hobbies that I loved as a kid. When I went camping, I do a lot of fishing, I did a lot of sailing. It was absolutely fantastic, and you can do almost all those things in Sandgate. Okay, so when I was establishing myself as an architect and partner in our very old practice, Trotter Architects, it's one of Brisbane's, there's several old practices, but it's pretty old. I'm the third generation of director there now. And in building my career, there was sort of amazing serendipitous things that occurred. And I'd done my hypothesis on, I called it regional uni when I was doing this major assignment at university, where I looked at what established the character of places, and that's always been of interest to me, is rather than building a building per se, it's interested in what are buildings, okay, and how do they create a community, and then what creates that character, and Sandgate is oozing with all of that. So one of the earlier commissions that I received came through a period when I returned from overseas, when the arse fell out of the market and out of the construction market in the early 90s. We had a change of government, the Labor government came in, and the subject of my talk, or my ride today, was to take a few interested parties around to look at the history of social housing. And when I returned from overseas, the state government embarked on some pretty amazing changes about how they would redevelop or redefine how public housing was built, rather than a standardised sort of cookie-cutter approach and brick approach that was sort of applied to suburbs and communities all around the state, that created some issues for the communities where this work was being done. They took a view about how do we think about the housing, and how do we make it integrate better within the community, so people who live in social housing and public housing feel very much part of the community and feel very proud about where they live, and don't feel ostracised and isolated from where they are. So these slides up here are some of the work that I produced. That is not public housing. That was my house I designed on a small lot in Gilpin Street. It still remains there, never quite finished. I couldn't afford that third bedroom on the left. But that was a wonderful project to work on. But while I was doing all of this, I was actually then designing the Pier Avenue housing project that was very controversial at the time in Shorncliffe. This was a sort of a period, I think, where the suburb was changing, and there was resistance around the amount of public housing that Sandgate and Shorncliffe community were receiving, and the way the government had attempted to put forward this project was quite controversial, because they did it through a ministerial designation, which meant people had to really go find out what was going on, and when they did, they went ballistic. Okay, because there was issues about scale and height, and the strange thing was I was caught up in all of this as a member of the community living in Shorncliffe, and I had an inherent conflict of interest, so I took the view, well, I'm employed by the government doing a government project, I need to stay out of the local politics, which is what I did. But at the same time, I was very privileged with a view of being able to put together these buildings, that the idea being that they remained indistinguishable and fitted within the local character of the Sandgate community or Shorncliffe community. So that's the project up there on the left. Later on, we went through a similar but much better handled public consultation process, where we designed actually a project twice and that was the housing on 7th Avenue, which was originally designed to face the waterfront, and there had been some political issues. I won't go into all of that, how that changed, but we ended up developing the rear of that block to create the housing here, which you can see almost going underwater in the recent flooding events. There's a photograph I took not that long ago. So I've always had this interest in public housing and urban morphology around what makes buildings relate and work well within the character of their environment. Okay. But then I'll move on to a few of my other passions. Okay, and like Peter, I'll probably talk a bit more about the sketching that I do and what inspires me. But I'm an avid sailor, so you will see this yellow boat being towed around my boat regularly around Sandgate off to the boat ramp or elsewhere, because I sailed this boat in Bowen over June, July, and in February I'm often sailing it at our nationals on Lake Macquarie down in New South Wales. I also have a little laser, which some of you might see on Flinders Parade. There's a group of us who'll launch off the beach there, and that became a bit of an inspiration for these sketches that you see on the left here of a laser. I'm usually capsizing, I'm usually falling over, and I've got a cycle jersey that is based on this particular design. But I'm fascinated with how much there is to see in the natural environment, and what Peter was saying around how you observe by sketching, because when you sketch, there's something magical that happens in your brain about your levels of observation. And to prove the point, once you sketch something that you've seen from real life, it never leaves you. So what happens if you ask me to draw anything around here, or Peter to draw anything around here? If I draw it, once I've drawn it once, it's like a tattoo on your brain. It goes shunk. And if you ask me to draw it again, maybe a year later, I'll tell you what, it won't be that different to what I drew the first time around. So, lasers, this was a sketch. I include the Story Bridge here, Peter. We did an epic sailing trip where we launched our little boats from Sandgate here, and we sailed all the way up to Corunna Downs and back. And so we sailed the brown snake. So that sort of inspired this sketch, which I included in our Koreal newsletter, because that's an active association I'm involved with and currently the Commodore of. And so, yes, I superimposed the brown snake, and then the nature of the sketch is a plan, and then I have a elevation, boats, okay, and then you'll see on the left-hand side, if you turn your head sideways, you'll see Mount Cootha and the antenna and so forth. So I like that. I don't know whether it's my architectural training, but I love the idea of how you can combine plans and sections and elevations and do weird things with them. Okay, back to the jersey, and I quite like this. I'll wear this. I was tempted to wear it today, but I'm a bit fat, so I didn't. But the jersey, what I've done here with this sketch that you see here is that I've got two views. So this one here, that's me. On the right side, you can see my hat. You can you hear me at the bottom of the ocean, and you can see the birds flying over. But what's gone wrong? What's gone wrong with my brain here? So that's not the same sketch. They're two different sketches. So this sketch is the bottom of Bramble Bay, looking back at me, floating in the water the wrong way around, and the pelican's the same pelican, but now I'm looking at his belly the wrong way up. Okay, so it's completely inversed and reversed. But I get a lot of stimulation and excitement from sailing, but actually what is actually out in Bramble Bay. Because every time I go out on the boat on Bramble Bay, I see something weird. Okay? I remember one year after some floods, we went for a sailing trip with my daughter, who was up the front of the boat, and we saw this most enormous shark just sort of come slowly towards the boat. And I said, Claire, now is not a good time to fall in the water. Okay, this is some inspiration where I've designed a cycle jersey, because I like cycling. I was going to talk a bit more about the bike, because Sandgate is awesome for riding, because we have so many now built bike paths. I generally commute to the city on this thing, or I've got an version of it, but cycling is absolutely fantastic in this area. So this cycle jersey was inspired by soldier crabs. because soldier crabs hang out in groups, don't they, like pelotons of bicycles? So I created a peloton of soldier crabs, and we know what happens to soldier crabs. They get picked off by birds, and so I have a bird hovering in plan view. You can see the shadow, and there's an unfortunate crab. This guy's next. Never fall behind, because that'll be the end of you.
That's a pelican peloton.
And then when you reverse that and you look up at the sky, it's a nightmare for a soldier crab because there's just millions of birds coming to get you. And then that's turned itself into the picture on the left here with my wife and a good mate of mine, David Cook, and cycling along the waterfront. So wearing a jersey that looks and feels like Sandgate, and I'm riding in Sandgate. How cool is that?
Very cool.
This is you can see this is the original sketch that the jersey was based on. This is a picture of me in the Scody showroom. There's a local company that does bespoke cycle jerseys. This was a jersey I included with the encouragement of my staff as sketches for a competition with the Brisbane City Council. I did not win. I got 4th place. They thought the subject matter might be somewhat controversial for those wanting to ride regularly. Well, this is what you deal with in Sandgate and places in Australia in the spring. Okay, so once again, on the back of the jersey is me on the bike being attacked by the magpie. And I can assure you this jersey is ineffective at stopping you being attacked by magpies. I've tested it. It does not work. But strange as it might seem, that started a relationship with Bernard Schreiber from Scody because I was able to work with him to create a stack of designs, because I took down my book because I said I'm going to get this jersey made up regardless of what the bloody council thinks, so I did. And you know what? In terms of bespoke jerseys, of all the ones that won that we went on the market, this is the best seller. Okay, I think it sold about 300. Okay, the sketching can move on to some strange things. So I've done another version of this, which is a currawong, because I got attacked by a currawong in Spring Hill outside our office. And I got really excited about that, so then I decided that I'd paint or get a guy called Zookeeper is his title, and he actually painted the image that I was after on the side of our office building wall in Spring Hill. And that painting is enormous. And if you go up Portman Lane off Astor Terrace, you'll see that painting on the side of the building, which is just a really fantastic image by that guy. He paints normally those huge silos out west in Billawheeler and places. He's done some of the most amazing paint work on buildings. This is a picture here of a house that's 3 doors up from us, which is the Knowles place, and that's on 7th Avenue. And I like to have a bit of sense of humour. I've given it to him. He's had it framed, but this is me. He's always working on his house. He never goes sailing. That's his boat. And I'm waving because I'm going sailing. But the joke was, once again, it's looking at something from plan. That's how I like to think. It's amazing what you can capture. This is our former residence here, my boat in the backyard, and it's an asbestos-filled house, and we loved it, and we lived there for many years in Perkins Street. More sketches. Where do I go with my sketches? The other thing you can do with sketching is you learn. So I'm absolutely obsessed with the weather and climate, and this series of diagrams, this particular image here, is a calendar of the year in the subtropics, and I have north and south and east and west defined, and the years you'll see December, January, February, and that explains everything you need to know about when trees flower, how the winds blow, what the sun is doing, what birds come out when and where. And as a practical demonstrator, in summer I picked out the sort of flowers that were based on the sketches that I get excited about. So as you can tell, I get quite encapsulated with where we are and the wonderment of living in the subtropics. I have an issue, and I talk about this with my architectural students at QUT because I teach design, that people say, oh no, we only have a summer and it gets cold. Bullshit. Okay, this place, and you look at Indigenous calendars and their knowledge, which we're yet to tap into, and in some cases the knowledge is completely lost, but it's my mission is to find out more about that and embed that so it becomes common knowledge within the community about what seasons we have and how things change in the weather. I know it's changing, but there's just some amazing things. At the moment we have our northeasterly that's just coming in. How am I going, Peter? Am I in trouble? No, not yet, but you've got about 1 more minute and you will be. Okay, so I'm doing pretty well. That's okay. This was a picture of our front door. So once again, it's an elevation on our old house with the jasmine coming out and the patterns in the timber and the glazing. And this is one of my favourite shirts design. I just drew a mullet, this down here. In Brazil, they call it tiana. Okay, I've been over to a place called Florianopolis, which I've obsessed with. I've been there twice now. It's the same latitude as Brisbane. It's on an island, the same shape as Stradbroke or Moreton Island, and they celebrate the run of mullet that come up the coast the same as they come up the coast here. We use them for dog or cat food. They eat them and they love them. Okay, so I've created a mullet jersey, and this is possibly my future father-in-law in Germany, proudly displaying his mullet jersey. I've also got a lady who's got a tattoo on her arm of the mullet. I've got no idea, why wouldn't she do it on a leg with some fishnet stockings? Would have been much better, but anyway. This is some reminiscing about poincianas. Paul talked about them as street trees. This is various views of a poinciana looking either up or down in the different seasons. On the left here we've got kind of the storm season and frogs falling and rain coming, but the leaves are falling. You've got, in the middle, you've got noisy miners picking off things, and the last picture is in bloom. But who can forget what happened at the beginning of COVID? The sketch on the left there was inspired when those tiger blue moths came out. When the world was turning to shit, all these amazing butterflies came out. We're across the bay and all through the community here. I was just intrigued by them. And one of my favourite locations, you'll see me down, once again, a plan view of a laser. That's my laser. And everyone know where the pool is there? On the left, as you're wandering down the walkway at the front at Flinders Parade there, and the path goes out to go around the pool. This is there. There's a little beach there where we can launch our lasers, and you can see the Stingray tracks and the track where I bring the laser up and launch it in my gear. And on the left-hand side is my second most favourite activity. That's riding this bike through the Boondall wetlands. There I am, and that's sort of running across one of those bridges through the Boondall wetlands. Gee, I'm running out of time. Better be quick. I was asked to do a Christmas card by Judith Gilmore for the Institute of Architects, so I got very excited about Christmas and Queensland, and maybe instead of snow we might have falling leaves. Crabs. Who doesn't like a sand crab? And that's it. Look, okay, thanks a lot for listening. I love Sandgate. I hope you love it too.
Oh dear, what did I tell you? Keeping that guy, hang on a sec, keeping that guy under controls has always been a challenge and continues to be for many of us who have to engage with him publicly. Look, I'm also inviting Paul to come and join the panel session after this next presentation, and if you'll just excuse me while I do some technology, I'll be able to, I think, with some glasses, introduce the next speaker, and I'll be able to do that via a presentation, because the next speaker's me, which is great. So yeah, that's right. And I'm gonna try and rip through this and build on the conversations that you've had today. So my name is Peter Edwards, and I'm a founding director of Archipelago, which is an architecture, landscape architecture and urban design practice based in the CBD. And what I would like to do in terms of my contribution to this amazing dialogue that we've had this afternoon here for Brisbane Open House and in its inaugural program of Villages of Brisbane, which we have the immense pleasure of being the first cab off the rank. I want to build on a kind of conversation to help let you look through an urban designer's eyes as to why a place is so special. This is a photograph I was able to take yesterday afternoon at the backyard of some new neighbours who moved here from Sydney. This is this kind of migration that's happening in the 4017, and everyone's moving up here. They're not moving up here for any other reason other than it is so special, and that's part of the change. I am a Brisbane born and bred, proudly born and bred Brisbane boy. And I'm not quite, as I was saying a little bit earlier in the day, I'm not sure I quite qualify as a local because we've only been here for 12 years. But in those 12 years, a couple of blokes in the back there who are taking photographs, Alexander and Henry, the newer arrivals to the 4017, which I'm delighted to call home, which is a fantastic thing. And the reason that we came here was a lot to do with the reasons why historically many have come here. Many have come here because there's something fundamentally special about this landscape that we are occupying in contemporary times, remembering that it was occupied for tens of thousands of years before we arrived. And it's drawing us to this kind of place between land and water. And my early infatuations about why I thought that was a good idea actually has to do much more with a love for fly fishing and my connection with Moreton Bay, which remains a tremendous secret and will do, because I'm not going to show you any more slides about that because I don't want anyone to know about what we have out there in terms of a world-class tuna fly fishery. But and that reason to kind of come here and constantly kind of connect to water is important as I begin this next generation of waterborne captains and lieutenants who hopefully will just drive me onto the fish very soon. Henry, get your licence so you can drive Daddy onto some fish. But that's the reason why I came here. But the reason to stay or to come in and commit and make a family here and build a life here is because of the very special sets of places. And I was kind of slightly intrigued about why the 4017, why Brighton, Sandgate, Shorncliffe, Deagon was kind of so amazing, which led me to put my urban design hat on and begin to kind of think about that in some detail and how would I explain this to others. So I want to start with the Coriolis effect of planet Earth, which explains a little bit the tilt of the planet, the way the sun shines on it, sets up a bunch of currents that move water globally around the world. And that sets up some prevailing winds which push against the east coast of Australia, and it makes sand do interesting stuff, right? So sand is, I'm going to point to the screen a bit. Sand here goes that way, which is weird because the Great Australian Current goes that way. That's kind of because of the prevailing winds. Which is why the controversy is around headlands, as you know, all the New South Welshmen are kind of building these groins out and stopping sand arriving in Queensland. It's a little bit selfish. And what's interesting about that is if you look at Australia on the east coast of Australia and where it sits on the globe, there's this easternmost point of Australia, which we all know is Byron Bay. And after Byron Bay, after we get Byron Bay, you know, there's this bit here with the easternmost point, and then the land starts to tip away. And the land tipping away does an interesting thing is because that sand that's travelling north starts to deposit itself in ever-increasing deposits. I mean, you know them as South Stradbroke, North Stradbroke, Moreton Island, Bribie Island. There's a couple of remnant bits in between, but also the very magnificent Fraser Island, the largest sand island in the world. And it's that morphology which we subtly benefit from, which has something to do with why the place is so special. Is my thesis, at least. And that has something to do with this idea that whilst we think we live on the mainland, we actually live on an island. And there's a feeling which I have, which I hope you have too, which is when I come home from my job in the city, or when I am able to come home to this part of the world, I feel like I'm leaving something behind. And it's the same feeling that someone has when one goes to an island. And there's this bit of green stuff, which is the very important preserved riparian corridor of Cabbage Tree Creek and the wetlands of the Pine River, and it all kind of joins up through some low-lying lands around the raceway, which kind of separates us from the mainland in a way. And it's a great kind of inter-urban break, which gives us a sensation that we're kind of passing over and entering this special place. And this special place is a coastal country town, and that the rest of our near neighbours kind of don't understand and have sort of forgotten about. It's really kind of lovely. So, and I like that quality, right? I like we're at home and we'll kind of say, oh, we need to get some milk. Yeah, no worries, I'll just go to town and grab it. I don't mean I'm going to get on a train, travel to the CBD and walk into Woolies, take 2 litres, and then turn around and repeat that journey to go. No, me going into town is to nip into town here and duck into Woolies and grab some milk. And that's what going to town still means. And the reason that we can say that innately, I'm going to town in Sandgate, is because Sandgate used to be a town. So prior to the amalgamation in 1925, and you can walk out the front of this building, in fact, and see it on the front of this building, constructed in 1911, I think, was that this was the Sandgate Town Council, was here. And we are our own town. We have our town hall that you're sitting, magnificent town hall, very beautifully restored, thank you very much. Jared Cassidy's not here anymore, but I get to kind of thank council for the restoration of this building. And we have across the way our very fantastic GPO, which is, yes, now a pub, because we don't have mail anymore, snail mail, as much as we drink beer these days, so yes, it's a pub. But we have a lovely railway station, we have a beautifully made main street. We have the makings of a town. And one of the reasons that that's important is this notion of a distinct pattern. And so urban designers talk about the morphology, urban morphology. And when we say morphology, it's a really fancy word, which means the thingness of a place. Right? Why is this place special? What is its thingness that makes it so special? And I maintain that part of the very important DNA, which has been touched on by many of our speakers today, Paul Hardyman did a marvellous explanation about the history and the way we might have arrived at these very special streets. And Steph's spoken about why we love them. And we've had, and both Paul and Peter talking about the drawing what they choose to draw, and the things they choose to draw are present in streets. But one of the reasons our place is so special is that we have a DNA that's made about streets for people, not so much for cars. They weren't made and generated as things for cars to use. And we like to claim them as our own and use them for ourselves, which is great. That little shot of Cotton Street, but if you went up there on Australia Day in years past, you would have enjoyed the kind of slight insanity of the Cotton Street cart race, which was kind of marvellous reclaiming of streets. Because the way that the streets are made of a distinctive pattern. So we're looking down on Sandgate here, and I'm showing you that the Sandgate's made of sets of streets that meet water. At the end of streets are water. And there's a notion around also streets that provide connections. And there's also an idea about promenades, esplanades, providing places for people to walk as well as main streets. And when you add all that stuff up, this is urban analysis about Sandgate. When you add all that stuff up, it's got this set of bones that are made by the streets that will last forever, that make it a special thing. It's specially made. A wonderful main street, a beautiful esplanade, avenues go from the main street to the esplanade and terminate at the water. That's great DNA. I use it when I'm designing new cities right now. I can tell you that the Maroochydore City Centre is made based on that plan. It's made of north-south movement boulevards and east-west avenues. And the master plan for the new mill precinct at Petrie, which you can't see yet because we haven't published it yet, but you will see when that's published, strong north-south boulevards and a tartan grid of east-west avenues connecting from the railway to the green. It's a great pattern, and it's not ours. It's actually borrowed from the old country, and the surveyors came out and went, well, we know how to do this, no worries, there's a main street, there's an esplanade, and we'll make the avenues connect all that stuff, that's all jolly good. It's not that they were pontificating about their urban design credential, that's just how things were done. And I can assure you that that pattern is repeated at Shorncliffe. I can assure you that that pattern is repeated at Brighton. And I can also assure you that it's pretty rare. This is how we do things in more contemporary times. These kind of quite awful sort of subdivisions that were created where for some reason we just took all of those hundreds of years of knowledge and just set them aside and tried to do it in new and allegedly interesting ways, but forever, separated the public from the waterways and privatised those water edges, created a kind of set of bones that don't help anything function, have no wayfinding capacity, don't allow communities connect together and are largely dependent on cars. And that's just a deep shame. But because a lot of that happens, It means that this stuff is really so special, and I just want to kind of engage you in a little photo essay to engage you in a discussion about those special qualities and talk about some specific issues. Landscape is very, very important for the 4017, and the reason that it's important is that trees were planted a very long time ago and by people who would never live to see their magnificence. So it's a debt historically that we owe. And what's interesting is that we've done a pretty good job of hanging on to a lot of them. And I won't analyse the reasons why, but we have to realise that not all of those trees are in the control of the public. A lot of those trees are in the private realm. And there's a kind of responsibility about trees, because they do a really important job, right? We have reasonably low-scale, predominantly character architecture in this part of the world, and the trees are taller than the buildings because they're very well established. And this is a shot from my front driveway, and I'm able to look across and see these lovely character houses backdropped by a stand of eucalypts. And I'm sorry to say that today only half of those exist. And you can go for a walk on a weekend and you can kind of, you wake up in the morning and you can kind of hear the sound of the chainsaws and you're thinking, crikeys, what are we going to lose today? And the reason that that's a little bit of an issue is that we don't actually have a kind of mechanism as a community to come together and have a conversation about keeping trees. It's a real shame, right? So we accept that council can tell us how far to set back our house and how high to make it and how much they have controls over buildings, but we don't control our streets and we don't control our landscape. And it's a real issue because these go strongly to the quality and character of the place and the reason that we all choose to live here. And one of the things that would be really interesting is that it's kind of, actually I'm just going to do this experiment. Put your hand up if you're a local. Okay, now if I said to you, 4017ers, you leave your hand up, we're doing this experiment, quick. You put your hand up if you're a local, and I'm going to go through some numbers, and I want you to take your hand down when I've come to a number that you're no longer willing to pay as an annual tithe by a community group to protect all of the trees in our neighbourhood. So what I mean is, if you're not prepared to pay any money, put your hand down at $0. $0, you're not prepared to pay any money? $100 a year. Are you prepared to pay $100 a year to keep your trees? Are you prepared to pay $200 a year? $300?
Where's the money going?
It's going to protect the trees. It's going to protect the trees. $400? $500? Okay, you can put your hands down. Thank you. That was a quick experiment, and there's about 50% of the 4017ers are happy to pay $500 a year to keep the significant trees. If we can go to the people who have significant trees and we can say to them, you have a tree that the community has identified as being very significant. We would like you to register your tree with the significant trees log and register, and this community will pay you every year a sum of money to keep your tree. And that would actually give you reason to pause. If you knew that you were going to receive some money to keep a tree that the community thought was significant, that would give you reason to pause to say, hang on a second, I'm just going to take a breath before I pull out the chainsaw and cut that thing down, and just pause and have a think about it. And in that space, that creates a little bit of a space for the community and council and others and neighbours and everybody to just have a little bit of a moment to pause and think about whether it's a good idea to cut the tree down. Because when we wake up one morning and the possums have been in the roof last night and I'm looking at the lawn I've been trying to grow for 2 years and I've got mangoes falling all over the street, I'll tell you what, it's pretty easy to just go, you know what, make a phone call, bang, and tomorrow morning the tree's gone. Out come the chainsaws and they can just go like that. And that quick decision to get rid of a tree robs us of trees. And I'll take a question in a little while. Because I know it's a vexed issue about trees on private properties, but it remains a challenge for us of how to keep them. Very recently, on Palm as an example, we lost 2 10-storey hoop pines that were on private property. There's absolutely no way we could stop those being cut down. And there was no opportunity to go and talk to that person and say, you know what, those trees you're about to cut down, we really love them and we really love them to stay. Is there a way we can work something out? And it's really hard to say that after they've gone through the back of a chipper. So the issue is to actually start to have a conversation about valuing our landscape, and to start to engage in these important issues. This is the remnant bushland along Flinders, and we know that the waterfront's very important, and its relation of bush to the water is very important. And you know that we sometimes get it right and we sometimes get it wrong. And it remains a little bit of a challenge and a vexed issue. But while it remains a vexed issue, no one's winning. We have to have a conversation about finding a balance that works for everybody. And what that might mean is that if people are prepared to forego their view for the establishment of landscape, how can they participate in something that's community-driven to kind of get a balanced outcome? And the balanced outcome might be actually establishing a landscape that can that can balance the competing demands so that the landscape can prosper. Because when we don't balance it, bad things happen, and we find our trees increasingly being poisoned, and that's a shame. We're also surrounded by bush as a suburb, and that's important to remember and understand, that green line that makes us an island is actually a lot of natural environments that are worth protecting and making sure that when our suburbs interface with them, that we're cognizant of that relationship and respectful of that relationship. And I think generally we are. I think generally, it's pretty hard to bump into anyone in the 4017 who says, "Oh, I don't like trees. Nah, hate them. Get rid of them." We all love them, but we struggle a little bit more as a community to work out how to value and venerate them moving forward. And we just, frankly, in my 12 years here, I have seen some grand old ladies felled and gone, and it's just a bit of a shame because they take 150 years to grow. So I'm glad I got that off my chest. We've heard a lot about streets today, and I'm not going to dwell on this too much other than to say the streets we have are fantastic. And that gives us our DNA, that gives us the kind of bones around which a special place is made, and made profoundly. And the streets are really unique. We have this kind of a thing that creates this, as Paul Hardyman was explaining a little bit earlier, this leftover idea of how streets were made with 6 metres of grassy verge before the gutter. But sometimes when we kind of interface with that grassy verge, we kind of because there's no guidelines or guidance to actually protect the character of those streets, we kind of interface with those grassy verges, sometimes in a bit of a heavy-handed way, which starts to erode that quality in the street. If everyone did crossovers down the street in the same way that this crossover was made, a 6 metre wide piece of bitumen, we wouldn't have the street. We would just have a 30 metre wide piece of bitumen running, which is exactly the thing we don't want to have, which is exactly one of the reasons why we moved here, because the street was amazing. So we've got to try and work together better as a community and have better guidance from council to help us do those things better. Our streets are wide, very wide, and Paul's made a case this morning in his presentation for claiming back some of that territory. I mean, this is a street. This street has I think it's a 27 metre wide piece of bitumen in the middle of it, right? Now, it needs about a little over 6 metres to run 2 cars in 2 directions, right? And the other 21 metres is not really required. Right, we've got to park some cars on the side, so there's another 2.5 either side, so knock another 5 out. That leaves you with about 16 metres of bitumen that's costing a fortune to maintain, baking us in the summer, and not providing any landscape relief for the people who live and visit this place. So if we could reconsider that, I do think there is an opportunity for a sustainable future looking at some of those things. Our streets importantly connect places, so what's important when we're thinking about the streets is to preserve the way that the connection between our distant views at streets is preserved. This is Yonder, where the big figs grow up, in that part of the street that we would otherwise bitumen everywhere else, and the lovely canopy comes over and touches, and you get to kind of move through green tunnels. I mean, it's just fantastic. And at the end of that, if you just stand there and look long enough, you'll see some sailboats go past. In Cabbage Tree Creek, I mean, it's really a significant kind of contributor to the quality and character of the place. Our streets are terminated by things that are not accidents, and we need to realise that. Sometimes even though, and I think that there's good, well-meaning people who actually know and understand that, and we lost the significant fig tree that used to terminate this street, but council had the wherewithal to come back and put the fig tree back. And that lovely experience of looking down the length of that street and seeing that fig tree marking the end of the street, that talks about purpose, that we're being purposeful about the way that we curate and make this place. It's not as accidental, and accidents are wonderful as well, but when we're purposeful, it really rings true with a kind of sense of love and responsibility for the way this place is designed and grows. So I think that's a good thing that we should continue to think about doing some more of, because that certainly doesn't exist on all of the avenues. I think that there's a lovely idea about the way that the home for trees made by this de-emphasising of the asphalt. And over time, through that quirk of history, we're blessed with really significant trees that are way in excess in terms of size and scale that other suburbs are able to have. So we could do more of that, right? We could create more of that and add more of that to our place and amplify that quality of our sense of place. Because it creates wonderful things that we know about. We like to go out and kind of claim these things and participate in them. You know, that it's perfectly fine that no one at all bothers that there's a tyre hanging from the tree. In fact, I was able to doing a little bit of radio this morning for ABC, look across the road at the kids who are out swinging in a yarn-bombed poinciana that's in the Verge, doesn't belong to anybody, and the kids were out there kind of shrieking and having a ball, swinging on the stuff and playing with the yarn bombs. It was just marvellous. So we do step out over our fences and come into these places for significant moments of public appropriation of streets, which is great. Various other forms of street have created quirks in the way that our streets are organised that leave us with vestiges of things. We need to realise that they're there and make sure we protect them moving forward. And this is the top of Palm. And one of the things that I love about this part of Palm is that this notion that the garden doesn't stop at the fence, that we can come into this place, this kind of quite curious quality in the streets, and make an investment in it. Like, I just asked you to raise your hands, and I'm talking about cash, and it's a bit churlish and a bit dumb and frankly, a bit crass, because we all make contributions to this place. We all love it. When we love it, we want to make a contribution. And when we step over our fence and we deliver a piece of garden on the other side of the fence, that's your first foray into the public realm. And it's a reflection of your civitas, your citizenry, to kind of make an investment in the public realm. And in lots of instances, we do it all the time, and in lots of instances, that investment goes well beyond the fence line. I love this one in particular. Like, that's a park bench that's put there by the owner of the house on the other side of that fence. It's not because they're going to come out every morning and they might come out every morning and sit there and have a cup of tea and a scone, but most of the time it's used by people they've never met, never known, don't even live locally, visiting the joint, who are walking up and down the street. And you know what? It's a beautiful place to just sit and pause and have a rest. What a lovely public gesture. So the idea that your concern finishes at your fence, and I know that not any of you think that way, but for any of us, wherever we are in our homes, think about the way that your public interface is a chance for you to kind of demonstrate your civitas, your commitment to your community, your citizenry, and to be thinking of others in the way that you make those kinds of contributions. So our streets are important. Our built form is important, and we understand character very much. We know that we can create guidelines to kind of control character and do all of those things. This is me checking my own time. Yeah, okay. I'm going to rip through some of this stuff, but we understand character, and there's lots of these little quirks, right, which exist around our neighbourhoods, which are left over from times when we had, we didn't have the big supermarket, and we had decentralised kind of convenience stores, and you had to whip down to the corner store, and all of those things provide contributions, which are just marvellous. So this notion of a peppering of use through the community is a fantastic thing to have. If you go to a lot of new kind of largely landed estates, that notion of peppering use doesn't happen. And it's not always because we don't want to build fantastic things. It's just that the kind of rules for how those things are made really struggle to kind of provide the things that we have inherited through history. And which is great for us, as we live in the 4017 and we can enjoy all these things, but it's a lesson about the way we build new places. And when you're building a new place, it should, by virtue of the fact you have all of the cities in all of the world to learn from, it should be the best place in the world that you're making. Yet we're doomed to forever kind of board the aeroplanes and suffer the journeys, or get on the train and come up to Shorncliffe to visit those places made famous for the things we've forgotten to build for ourselves. It's really kind of insane. So it's not just... we're blessed also with some pretty decent transport infrastructure and some heritage buildings and this building is in the process of being renewed as we speak. But those vestiges, I love this picture because in the back of the train there is the old timber bridge that I did have a lot of discussions with government about replacing. And I seriously said, listen, the character doesn't stop at houses. Character is also important in the way that the bones of our city are made. And that lovely little timber overpass, I know it wasn't equitable. I know that people in wheelchairs can't use it, but it was pretty. And we could have gone out there and replaced all of the problems with it with 2 carpenters on a weekend and a lump of hardwood. Given it, the community would have painted it and we could have kept it. But what we did is we removed it. And and it's just death of 1,000 cuts, right, to the qualities of your place. And we have to know, and maybe if Peter Richards had gone and done a drawing of it and Paul Trotter had made a tea towel out of it, we could have actually, maybe generated enough community will to keep it. But we have to kind of be public about our love and have lots of conversations and dialogue about it and give our politicians permission to give us the city of our dreams. If we don't do that, they're not going to give it to us, and we don't get it and deserve it. And I know, look, I'm going to apologise if anyone from St Pat's is here, and I'm not trying to be controversial, but I am trying to draw the point that when we build new things, it's a chance for us to take a really great step forward in amplifying and curating our sense of place. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we get it wrong. I'd like to be getting it right more times than wrong, because this is the building that should have been the reference point for that thing. And I just don't think we had a really, it's the same situation. Take a moment. Pause, take a breath. Are we doing the very best thing possible here? Because this is the St Pat's, the seminal building at St Pat's, a very important heritage building, and we could have amplified that sense of place and delivered a significant contribution to its fabric. And we should do with every building they build. Or frankly, with every building that gets built anywhere, because this is the town hall. This is this great vestige that when we were a town, we were able to have this. We have a great GPO. And when these sorts of things arrive, it's a real challenge for us. Now, I have to say, it could have been a lot worse when Woolies arrived. But when we moved in here, that change was happening. It was live, right? And, the at-grade car park at the corner, was that really the best we could have done? And when you think about the old Woolies that we kind of lost, which I loved, because it was just this ramshackly kind of old heritage building with a woolly stuck in it, and you kind of walk up and down corridors and the floorboards creak and your trolley gets pulled off to one side, and it was just a fabulous kind of warren or little corridors, and it didn't make any sense, and it wasn't woolly language, and the lights weren't bright, and it was just marvellous. It was great going to that Woolies. And what would have been great is if Woolies actually recognised they had a really, really kind of cool Woolies here, and they wanted to make the new Woolies with some of those qualities and characters and build that for us to retain. Now, I think they have to wrestle, supermarkets wrestle with a lot of very difficult things. I think there was a lot of people who were trying very hard to get this Woolies to do good things, and I don't think it's certainly not 100% broken, but it remains a kind of opportunity to have a conversation about, well, thank goodness it's here and connected to Main Street, because it could have gone just over there somewhere and sucked the centre dry. So there was some smart things about keeping it connected to Main Street, but I do think that there's a Main Street quality that we haven't necessarily kind of captured in that new project. So thinking about these things is very important, and when we get a chance to build something new, it's a great opportunity for us to take a really positive step forward, and we've got to realise that, create that moment of pause and to create that opportunity. Water's extremely important. I'm going to rip through this because we're running over time. Courtesy to my predecessors. Water's really important and remains important, and us connected to our bays is the thing why Shorncliffe, became Shorncliffe, and why Sandgate became Sandgate, and why Brighton is Brighton, is because of our connection. And Deegan unfortunately was probably a little bit too connected with water in recent months, wishing they were possibly a bit less connected with water. But also Cabbage Tree Creek remains a very important kind of riparian corridor that's important for us, and we know and understand that this part of the world used to be festooned in oyster houses back in the late 1800s, and everyone would catch the train up and they'd go out to the oyster house, and they'd penny a pound these bottlers. The guy would go out in a punt, and we had all these oyster reefs just offshore because Moreton Bay wasn't totally stuffed then, and he would have a huge shovel with a hinge on it, and he'd just go crunch, crack, and a bucket of every time he did that, he'd put a bucket of oysters in the boat, and then he'd row it back, and someone would shovel them all out, and everyone would just sit there kind of, opening these little oysters at a penny a pound, and drinking great amounts of beer and throwing everything off the veranda into Cabbage Tree Creek. And there's a dentist who lives up on Main Street, just outside of town, and he loves it when big storms happen because he's a bit of a keen scuba diver fossicker, and he goes into this part of the world and pulls these kind of old bottles out, and every one of these bottles is these lovely antique bottles, and they're worth about $1,000 a throw. So he's quite committed to that endeavour, incidentally. But our marine history is an important part of Cabbage Tree Creek, which we've lost a lot of, but I think that our connection to water allows us to continue to have that love affair with the water. Climate change, this is an important thing. If you don't think climate change is real, I'd like to invite you to go down with your ruler and measure the little wall that we've added in recent times, which I've got to say doesn't always work. For anyone who's taken a little bit of a stroll along Dover's Lane, it's Lover's Lane, but that was a graphic design error when they sent the poster over to somewhere to... The guy was halfway through writing his D, and he went and had a cup of tea, and someone came back and went, "Oh, Lover's Lane, yeah, let's do that, that's fantastic." And so Lover's Lane was actually Dover's Lane historically. But if you go to that part of the world and you're walking along there and it's, there's a northwesterly and a bit of a high tide, there's a fair chance a slap of water is going to kind of nail you with a bucket over the side. But that's the first vestige, the first hint that anthropomorphic climate change is beginning to manifest itself in our infrastructure. And it's a big concern for our low-lying suburbs, and we have to kind of be conscious of that moving forward. And conscious of the kind of importance of place. So this is the lagoon, Iron Bumping Lagoon in the middle of our town, which we love it. But it's actually a vestige of a very important Indigenous place, and we haven't done a very great job of kind of recognising that and using it as a moment of education and using it as a place of reconciliation, an ability to kind of use it as a positive reconciliation of our recent past. Because we just keep doing this kind of stuff to it, which is important. I mean, the shops have got to trade, and it's really important and all that sort of stuff. So, finding a balance between the kind of competing needs of cars and the competing needs of place is a challenge for us moving forward if we want to protect our special qualities. And water it's not just connecting to the bay. Our lagoon systems create wonderful streets with wonderful address, which is really important, and we need to kind of continue to enhance that moving forward. We have a broad range of uses in our 4017, and my position would always be to keep them. Forces of gentrification means that some of the things which we love, the people who live in the 4017 and the eclectic, rich and varied cross-section, our social cross-section, is really worth not only hanging on to, but actually enhancing. Right? And if the forces of gentrification just continue unabated, we will lose that special diversity, and it will in a time in the future, we'll kind of tell stories about the interesting bloke who used to come around and mow your lawn, or bumping into this person on the street, and the characters that are around. And I think that's great, and we want to kind of hang on to those. This chap did give me permission to take his photograph. He's a wonderful guy. Sits in the sun every morning on his front step. Those things are very important. We have our shop fronts that are very important, and we need to kind of continue to make a home for those. There has been places. This is down near. Down at, I think it's Sinbad, where down near the boat ramp, and there's a kind of big bit of dirt, and it fronts onto a golf course, and everyone looks at it and goes, "Wow, that'll make a greater site for a bunch of apartments overlooking the course to the north and next to the yacht club. Wouldn't that be marvellous?" And we struggled to kind of keep our, we lost our fish co-op. Which wasn't able to be sustained, which is a bit of a shame. But we can still nip down there and buy prawns off the back of the trawler, which is part of that kind of eclectic opportunity of living in this part of the world. So when we're thinking about this and we're thinking about those opportunities into the future, we need to be kind of careful that as we begin to kind of make interventions to solve problems like the continuous boardwalk along the water. From this public place around to through Cabbage Tree Creek, that we don't lose all the special things that go with that. Look, I'm going to kind of stop it there, and only to say that this place is made special, yes, through a relatively recent history of occupation and its very particular DNA. But it's the people who live here and choose to move here and have a like-mindedness for what the 4017 is, why we love it so. And that like-mindedness needs to be the currency that we trade into our future with. Thank you.
Now,
I'm answering a couple of questions, because there are some questions from the floor, I'm going to come to you in a moment. No, actually, there is some legislation that protects trees. They're called vegetation protection orders. They exist in some instances, but as Paul Hardyman said earlier, there's going to be some emphasis before. As Paul Hardyman said earlier in his presentation, whilst I'm doing this, I'm going to invite Steph Wyeth, Paul Trotter, Peter Richards. Cassie, you're going to jump up there? Yeah, to take it up on the stage. Who am I missing? Who am I missing out of that? Paul Trotter, Peter Richards, Paul Hardyman, right here. Up on the stage, we'll have a little question. We can have a little question and answer session. So there's a chair just off the stage up there. You can just drag a chair out while I'm answering this question. There's no legislation to protect trees on private property unless they have a special vegetation protection order over them. So there is no, unlike New South Wales, which has a lot of legislation that protects trees everywhere, we actually don't have any ways to stop people on private land cutting trees. Well, that's a little bit different. That's two D20s dragging an enormous chain between them up to the central Queensland to make land clear for grazing. That's a slightly different issue. The tree protection here is about trees that were planted 100 years ago and making sure that they get cut down. So at the top of Palm, there was a 10-storey fig tree that was felled because it was on private land by the people who owned the tree. Because the roots have gone into their stormwater system. And I reckon they cut the tree. So and it took them 4 days to cut the thing down. It was a massive job. And we lost one of our great fig trees that everybody loved. But unless we create a mechanism as a community to go and say to those people, tell you what, pick a tree, and the community is going to pay you $50 a year. Because if you added up that price that I just did in that survey before, and you looked at the population of the 4017, and you did $100 a head every year, we would have an annual budget of not nothing, right, to run around and to help support and keep people who commit to a program of keeping a tree that the community has identified as significant. Yeah, no, all those things are important, but they certainly die very quickly when they change all those things. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is just raise back on the stage. Hang a second. And I'm going to, there might be some new people in the room, so I'm just going to hand the mic along, and how are we going to do this? What I'm going to do is take this one out. I'm going to take this one out. Oh, Laura's here, thank goodness. I'm going to just, if there's some new people in the room, just quickly reintroduce everybody who's been here. Paul Hardiman's here, fantastic. No, come up, you can take this in. And I'll leave that one and I'll give him this. Too late. Okay, fantastic. You can sit here and I'll just ask the question and you guys can answer it and you can take this. So you've just heard from me, but I'll ask the mic to be passed along and for the panels to reintroduce themselves. And the reason that it's important is that you've heard about streets for people and why they're important. You've heard that we can actually design and build for love and kindness. You've had a conversation about why drawing teaches us to see cities differently, and you've had a rambling around a kind of, a sort of scallywag adventure about living in the 4017 generates a bunch of kind of interests that you can make manifest in many means. Paul, go ahead.
Okay, Paul Hardyman is my name. I'm a landscape architect. I live in Sandgate, and I have a real love of history of landscape and trees.
Hello, I'm Cass. I'm a landscape architect. I assisted Paul with his great streets presentation.
She did all the hard work.
I am Steph Wyeth and I'm an urban and social planner. I'm really interested in what makes communities tick and making places fairer for everyone.
Peter Richards, an architect urban designer. I'm not from this area, but I'm happy to be here. And I like the way that we can explore and understand the quality of the place for sure.
Paul Trotter, nothing too many places have changed since I spoke. So, who I'm director of Fulton Trotter Architects, architects in town that live here and love it.
Thank you. Hang on to those mics. I've got a mic here, and if people have questions for these people, there's one right here. I'd like you to introduce yourself and ask your question. We've got these guys for a little while.
Hi, I'm Jason Becker, Sandgate local. I just wanted to perhaps share an experience recently. I have 2 large trees on my property. I have 2 large trees on my property that I thought were just in a little bit of danger from neighbours, so I actually devoted about a week of my life to trying to get tree protection orders on these trees. And I went through all the national assets laws, I went through all the council. I must admit to the point that I annoyed them, and there was no way in the world that I could get a protection order for my trees, which is quite different to my experience in Sydney, where in Sydney if you just look angrily at a tree, you get arrested and carted off. And the discussion progressed to the point that the only way I could get a protection order for a tree was if it was massive, spectacular, and truly iconic. And I said, well, that's fine, but those trees are getting towards the end of their natural life. What about the next generation of significant landscape trees? So I was just very frustrated with the council that there was no avenue to protect trees that were, super iconic, no category, no potential for the future. What do you guys think about tree protection laws in Brisbane?
I'll jump in on that one, Jason. Look, I was a registered consulting arborist for a lot of my career, particularly in New South Wales, where the tree laws are far more significant and real. And I actually gave up my licensing as a registered consulting arborist in Queensland about 5 years ago, because the care level is so low and it's so hard to get trees to be protected. And
that was my experience.
Yeah, and it really is frustrating. It frustrated me to the point that I've just walked away. I thought, that's too hard. And I've protected a lot of trees that are good trees. I'm happy if a tree's a rubbish tree, happy to say, yep, move on. But I literally gave up. And I don't give up very easily. I'm pretty dogged. And it is very frustrating. And I think Pete Edwards touched on it briefly earlier on when he said, planners love to plan to protect your sight line to your neighbour's house by putting a screen up or protecting how houses and buildings interact. But the majority of privacy that we all achieve in our housing environment is actually from the green bits, not the built bits. So the protection for the green bits is so poor compared to the over-regulation of the planning codes around the built bits. And you've just seen that, Jason, and it does my head in a lot. And as I said earlier, the neighbourhood plan, there's 3 or 4 trees that apparently are the significant ones in this whole area. Like Beth said, who's the lunatic that drew that? Seriously, I could walk out the door here and find 5. So don't start me.
I think you started then. I think that's the issue. I think this issue, if this issue is to get addressed, solutions have to come out of places like the 4017. It's certainly because the 4017 still has them, and we still have a lot of great trees. And one of the opportunities is for us to sort of bring everyone around the campfire and have a conversation about where a solution might lie, because it's beyond the mechanism of governance, frankly. But as a community, we might be able to do something really creative, to be able to do something creative and innovative, using new technologies to allow everyone to talk to each other, mapping techniques to kind of decide on where, and we can start that program. It could be really successful. So much so that people might move in here and go, I'm going to get on that program and plant a significant tree, right? And then go for registration because they want someone to pay them for $200 a year to get it. Questions.
Just following on from the last 2 comments, just wondering if that's been your experience, either of you learned gents, across Queensland, or is that more of a SEQ Brisbane thing? I'm just thinking of a few places along the coast where, from a grassroots perspective, decisions have been taken by councils to be more respectful of, you know, the green frame around our cities and settlements. Noosa being an obvious example where the council has been a strident example of taking a more proactive, enlightened view in that space.
I think, Dave, it's a South East Queensland thing, very much so. And I think people in South East Queensland seem to think that they have much more of a right that it's their tree, they can do whatever the hell they like with it, and they don't have a sense of the communal benefit of that. Now, in my backyard, I've got a fair amount of green stuff. All my neighbours don't have so much green stuff. The best bit of their backyard is my backyard. We need to look at what that benefit is to everyone else.
Yeah, the risk of focusing on trees, we have a mango tree which is about 6 stories high in our backyard. It produces 300 kilos of mangoes every week in the summer. Right? And that's my maintenance responsibility. So I can get out and cut it down, it's a bit of a pain frankly, but I don't because I know what the cost will be to the framing of my house and my level of enjoyment. And it's not just the enjoyment that I enjoy, it's actually benefiting 6 other properties. So I do think that very nicely, I'm not saying that, I'm doing it very nicely, a lady on the doorway has a 10-story hoop pine in her backyard. I mean, these are huge old trees, we've got to find a way to do things better about it. I'm happy to shift the conversation on from this very next issue to other things. Is there other questions? Other questions from the floor, otherwise I'm going to ask one. Because we've had a conversation about our shared experience about why the 4017 is so special. I'm just wondering whether you can go along the panel and make a contribution to that conversation from your own experiences. Why is the 4017 so special? And I know it's for lots of reasons. Give me one example.
The mixed demographic. There's crazies still in Sandgate. I love them all.
The water.
I think it's the fact that you can put down roots here and then watch your own children put down the same roots and the relationships that they form that is ongoing, and the fact that you can have friendships across different demographics, so from very young to very old.
I think the fact, and Peter talked about this, is that Sandgate was seen as a town before Brisbane existed, and other parts of Brisbane have a similar tradition, like Ithaca, which is near where I live. So I think the fact this was a town originally, it has buildings like this, it has a legacy of civic architecture and infrastructure, helps, to me, anchor and gives a civic pride to a community. Of course, the geographical position and the headland and the bay is unparalleled. That's fantastic as well. But to me, it had an idea of being a town right from the start, and that sort of idea is imbued. You know, what I said in my talk is I come and choose to do sketches. The buildings that I've drawn are the old ones. This one, Pullman Hotel, which has been renovated quite a bit, but is still a historic building, and then the old Masonic Hall building. And I want to do the church, the old Baptist church with things now childcare centre. I mean, that legacy of architecture is actually quite powerful. And I also did the landscape and the setting of the pier today as well as a drawing, which I really enjoyed doing. So you've got natural ingredients, you've got the concept of a town, you know, it's fantastic. But just one observation about specialness. The Sunshine Coast has a special identity. You talk to the people there, and when you ask them about it, they say, we're not the Gold Coast. So my view would be, don't say we're special because we're not something else, or we're not something else. Just be special because you are, and be positive about those qualities, and have a conversation amongst the community. Because specialists can be ephemeral as well, and be based on community values and community perception. So to me, it's a discussion, a dialogue between members of the community about what is the special. Trees are an issue, and that's fantastic. But other qualities need to come through, and I think that being sensitive of the community to the qualities of place is really a fundamental thing. And I think, I'm not sure how well that happens necessarily in the community broadly, but just as an encouragement to be very aware of your environment and the qualities of the environment and cherish them and talk about them with others. I'll talk about it as well.
Oh, look, I agree with all those sentiments. And being an architect, you can often get carried away, or I get carried away talking about architecture and the built environment. But for me, just as
know landscape architects had on, but I love just the places to pause. There's such a variety of natural seascapes or places that you can just hang out. I think I filled out one of those forms that we're going to hang up on a little clothesline there. And what I filled out is I just love that little spot, for example, where on the bottom end of Moora Park, where you keep on riding to where the walk deteriorates, just at the stone wall there, and the walk deteriorates into the kind of bush bash around the headland. There's a little chair there that I would quite like to sit there some mornings, in winter mornings with the sun, and it's out of the westerly, and you just get to enjoy the sparkle of the water and that seascape. But there's lots of different places like that around. If you're riding a bike, as you've seen, it's a continuous visual feast wherever you go. There's just stuff going on and different views, and it's quite unique because of the topographical changes and landscape changes.
Cass, we haven't heard very much from people who aren't middle-aged today. I'm just wondering, from a point of view of as cities change, change can be a confronting thing, but at the same time you can see all this kind of potential. I'm just wondering whether, from your point of view personally, as a young 4017er, what potential do you see for this place moving forward, and how can some of the things that might concern you and your interests participate in that shared vision for the future?
I think that it would be good if there was more potential for me and my peers to stay. The general cost of living out here is high, and I'm only here because I still have the privilege of living at home. So it would be nice if I could continue to put my roots down here, but that's a bigger picture.
So we don't need granny flats, we need any flats. Oh, I'm so sorry. If you'd like to make That's actually not true. So I'll tell you a story. So it's not just me, I'm one of them, but I know others who have properties in the 4017 and rent them well below market to make sure that there is at least one other place for someone to rent and stay here. So I could quite happily turn around tomorrow and double the rent on that place that I own. But I don't. It's not actually going to allow me to sleep very well at night, knowing that I just continue to contribute to the problem. I don't need to, so it's kind of something that I can do. I really do think in the same way that we can hang on to things that are precious, we can hang on to people that are precious. And that's about providing a place for people to be.
That's great, and thank you for doing that, but most landlords
I know that's usually the case. I probably know about 3 others who do that.
So Peter, I was just going to jump in and say that what's happened too is with gentrification, so that idea of change happening and different demographics rolling through, is that, as you pointed out, that we are losing our boarding houses and flats. And they're being turned into it's a circle. They start off as grand homes, and then they ended up as flats, and then they're in boarding houses, and then they're slightly private homes. But we're not replacing them with smaller dwellings of any form. Even down, you drive out to over the bridge down Brighton Road at the moment, and a number of the little single-storey weatherboards that have gone just in the last month. It's really large project homes going in. So there is a lot of change, and we can see that happening. So I think we do need to look at different housing options for people. Even the caravan park at Brighton, I don't think it's actually increased the number of spaces there if you look in the last 10 years.
But you could go into that same caravan park and you could actually look at the typology, you could double its density and its population, and probably double its amenity with a little bit of design innovation.
I think a really unpopular topic is development in Sandgate, and I find it staggering. As much as you've heard me say how many things I love about being in Sandgate, I find it staggering in some of that recent council planning process that everyone wants no development in Sandgate, yet everyone wants lots of bars and restaurants and everything to be thriving, and you go, okay, well, where's all the people to make that thrive? You look at places like Nunda, fantastic example, where they've they focused the development and the density in the middle of the town. They didn't spread it right throughout all the old parts of the suburb. And you look at the thriving environment that they have in the middle of the township there. Imagine if McCormack's or Jay's Hardware or some of these big sites right around outside here, outside the town hall, right in front of the train station, very little impact on anyone else in any way. If they got developed with some density and some height, I just find it staggering. Sure, no one wants a 20-storey building next door to their place, but no one lives next door to Jay's or next door to McCormack's. All those sites with these fantastic opportunities, they're right on the train line, they're near the water, they're near the shops. I think it's really interesting when we talk about protecting Sandgate. You've got to protect it, but you've also got to be looking to the future.
Yeah, another way to have that conversation. I want to turn this into a town hall meeting because we all want to have a friendly drink in a second and finish this wonderful day on a really positive note.
My wife said to me, no, it's really controversial, but I said I couldn't promise.
I know. And bless you. And I like to have conversations instead of up conversations. And the and conversation is in that space is listen. When change hurts is when it rolls over the top of you in an uncontrolled way. We've got the opportunity to actually plan and create, continue to curate. Our job and our responsibility is to curate the 4017 and leave it better than when we arrived at it. And we have to wrestle with forces of change, but if we don't take a positive position on that stuff, it'll roll right over the top of us. And that's when it really hurts. That's when you have angry town hall meetings and they're like, you'll never approve that, and that gets approved because we haven't been able to have any other positive conversation about it. It turns out being not that good, right? So whereas we could have actually had a really positive conversation about the inevitable coming change and create some guidelines for planning and design advice to make sure that it was the very best that it could possibly be. So I do think it's important to continue having and conversations about change and make sure that we're always engaged in a positive conversation about it. Which is my way of saying that positively.
I'm trying to make it a partner for Cass to live in.
Yeah, exactly right. And actually, you know, the any flat is a great idea, right? Because everyone, like lots of people, I've got a plan, it's mine's going to be a granny flat, but you know, the any flat is an interesting idea. If you've got a bit of dirt in the back, and actually you don't mind, you know, you can get a tiny home, you want to pop in there, and you can have a little person that's quite discreet that comes and joins and lives in it. Sorry? No, it's actually, well, we can talk about that, but they're not illegal. You can't rent them out to someone who's not a family member. You are dead right. And that's the problem, right? Yeah. So the problem is that and this goes in this housing affordability issue, is we've got this massive challenge trying to continue to provide access to housing, and we've got governments that's actually saying, you know what, you can't have townhouses in the suburbs anymore. Because people are saying, I don't want townhouses in my suburb. And the people down at the requisite city hall or that particular place say, oh, well, we better not make sure we change our guidelines and stop putting townhouses in suburbs, which is exactly the wrong thing to be doing. So that issue, it's a very vexed issue, the issue around access to affordable housing, and we're not going to solve it this afternoon, other than to say, as a community, we could probably try harder to make a home for everyone, so that we can keep something about our special quality that we've identified today. Is there any other questions or comments from the panel? I'm going to wrap us up, and I want you to thank very much. Oh, you don't mind. You're the man, Mike.
Well, the comment results, it builds on your theme, and I don't have the answers to it, but I think it is actually a mindset that there is a negative regressive mindset around, well, just keeping something as it is and not dealing with change. Because we're all creatures of habit, and we don't like change, by and large. I don't like change. But you've got to ask yourself the question, I love Sandgate. Sandgate is awesome, but it could be more awesomer. There's lots of other opportunities to make it even better than it currently is. And that could be landscaping, it could be how we're handling those potentials you talked about with the streets. This place could be amazing, but you've got to change, you've got to reverse your thinking about it and not see change as the devil. But it's got to be well thought through, it's got to be considered, it's got to have people involved with it, and it's got to be done really well. When you do those things, amazing things can happen. Because I'm convinced that Sandgate could be so much better than it is. I love it as it is, but it can even be better.
I think some of your sketching should start to reflect that. Maybe.
Yeah, well, let's put some more.
Potentially our future Sandgate.
Actually, that's an excellent point. When we create really compelling vision for a possible future and we share it, it's powerful. And I think I can't talk specifically about some work that the Chamber of Commerce might be doing, but there are some things that are afoot to try and engage exactly with that, to try and create a really positive vision. We might think, one of the neat things we could do, maybe we could have actually a council again, we could create our own master plan. That's not going to happen. Look, I think we can all agree something special has happened here that we all get to share and enjoy. And we can leave today knowing there's a bunch of opportunities for us to continue that conversation and to commit ourselves to improving and enhancing and amplifying those qualities moving forward, because we can understand them a little bit better. This is the inaugural Villages of Brisbane program under Brisbane Open House. And now, I'm not sure if you're closing comments today or you would like me to close. You can just say, point with your finger around.
Well, firstly, what this number got, the Sandgate hasn't got.
Say, listen, Mike.
Firstly, what has London got that hasn't Sandgate got?
Yeah, no, the answer to that, absolutely, it's a good question, Mike. So the answer to that is density.
Density, what's that got to do?
Because we have. The density issue is about if we continue.
It doesn't count. It doesn't add up.
But my point is that a lot of the restaurants and bars and things in Sandgate suffer from a lack of people. And so Nunda has more people, is my point.
I mean, the challenge is, can Brisbane population set to double by 2040? And we're part of that. So well, I know it's a controversial issue. I want to tell you a town meeting. Love everybody. And change is marvellous if we make a really positive force. And it's terrible if it rolls over the top of us. I'd like change to happen via communities and collaboration, by vision and design. I don't want change to happen via a chainsaw. So I'm going to hand over to my venerable, esteemed, paternal father of architecture and allow him a few minutes to close some comments.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Peter for emceeing the afternoon with great aplomb, as didn't surprise me at all. There's been some wonderful commentary in this room today. We didn't really know anybody could come to the room, and it's been pretty full all day, and that's been just a delight for us from Open House to see the support that you brought to this inaugural event. We do want to roll this out at many other places in the city. We'd love you to do it every year, because we think it's a great thing to focus your own community on, and we'd love to build this up over the next 10 years before the Olympics, so that every village of Brisbane has something special about it and celebrates it and understands it. Everybody pretty well here has volunteered their time. We have a very small staff of people at Open House, and everybody else you've seen running around with hats on has been a volunteer. And I'd like you to thank them for the effort that they've put in. That includes our esteemed, I don't think we could have got a better panel in any other village, really. Maybe we picked Sandgate because we knew you all lived here, and we could actually corral you into it. So thank you all very much for your energy that you brought over it's not just today. It was the Iron Muppet Festival. There's been all the work leading up to this, and it's very heartening for us to see this momentum re-established, because we weren't sure we would survive. So my thanks to you all. I don't know, Peter, is there anything else here?
Thank you.
Thank you, and good night.